This story began one noble evening, where many aristocrats gathered, and some of the girls started discussing the latest news among themselves, and one of them asked if she had heard that Yuria Primrose had already returned. She also said that some people were saying that she was very successful in her business, and another girl replied that absolutely everyone already knew this story, so it was not something new for them. As soon as the young girl with blonde hair and a beautiful outfit entered inside, everyone immediately began to discuss it among themselves even more. One of the men turned to the other and asked, "Was this really the same young girl who left her family and achieved everything completely on her own?" The guy replied that it was she, and also that she was on the list of the 10 richest people in the empire. And besides, he heard that she topped that list. The ladies were delighted with her beauty. One of them said that she could not even imagine how rich this girl was, because her dress was embroidered with such stones. But one of the girls, grinning, replied that she thought the lady was simply very trusting, because it could not be that these stones were real. It was very irresponsible, in her opinion. But then suddenly Primrose came closer to them and said that, in fact, they were real because she was not one to wear fakes. The girls immediately felt very embarrassed because they had discussed her so loudly. And because of this, the girl had heard them, so they bowed and asked her forgiveness for this. Yuria replied that her cosmetics company, which was called Unit, was incredibly successful. And so they were official partners of the Imperial Trading House, and now they were also involved in jewelry. Then suddenly the girl noticed Lady's skin and said that it was very dry, so she suggested that she come to Unit because they could select the right moisturizing care for her. Yuria also said that she had a hand in it, so she could guarantee the quality of these products. They would definitely be able to cope with any skin type. As soon as the noblewoman heard this, she was delighted. She immediately thanked the lady and asked for forgiveness for saying such things about her. The girl also said that she had no idea that Primrose was so knowledgeable about trade. But then the lady suddenly frowned and said that she had been interested in it since she was very young. The girl explained that it was certainly not surprising that they did not know about it, because they considered her unworthy of their attention, so they did not want to waste time not listening to this gossip, but to learn something of their own. She also wondered if it was true that to them she was just Lilica's boring older sister, but they still talked about her behind her back, as if they knew anything about her. The girl immediately followed her and said that this was not so at all. There was simply a misunderstanding, and she begged Primrose to allow her to explain everything. But at that moment, the girl thought that if she had said something like that earlier, she would have, of course, caused a storm of indignation. However, at that time, even noble gentry were defenseless in the face of wealth, and she was the eldest daughter of the respected Duke of Primrose. In fact, she also had an older brother named Jackson and a half-sister named Lilica. These were the people who were part of her life, and despite the fact that Lilica was illegitimate, she was accepted very well into the family. With her good nature, she won everyone's love and adoration, and for a long time eclipsed poor Yuria. The girl was very reserved and pragmatic, so they were constantly compared, because the charming illegitimate child and the estranged daughter from the legal wife were completely different. People loved the story of the sisters who were opposites of each other, but Yuria had hope for a blessing. It was an ability that could bring any plant to life, and a power that made plants bloom even faster and more vibrantly. And at that time, unrest began in society. Cosmetics containing lead took the lives of many noble ladies. Using her abilities, the girl created cosmetics from natural ingredients, and the products she created caused a public resonance. Everyone was interested in her, from the aristocracy to ordinary citizens. This is how Yuria, who was considered an ugly duckling by everyone, found a use for her abilities and helped many people. She even ended up becoming the richest person in the empire, which only played into her hands. She had the power to make plants bloom, and thus turned it into an asset when everyone else considered it a liability. The girl had already started to leave the event when she suddenly heard a voice behind her. It belonged to her sister. The girl ran up to her and immediately asked Yuria why she hadn't written her a single letter during all this time. Lilica looked at her with a sad look and asked if the girl had even imagined how much she missed her and worried about her. She also said that, despite the fact that the girl left her family, this did not mean that she had to stop communicating with her brothers and sisters. But the girl replied that a lot of water had flowed under the bridge since then, so unfortunately, nothing could be brought back, and she did not understand why she should touch on this topic now. Her stepsister suddenly noticed the dress and asked, Did she really like that jewelry that much? Lilica also said that she had sold her diamond necklace that her father had given her, so she thought she didn't like them. But now she showed up to such an event covered in stones. Yuria, raising her head up, replied that in reality she simply did not want to have anything to do with the Duke of Primrose, and that was why she did it. Lilica was very indignant when she heard this. She immediately asked why she addressed her father like that. How could she call him simply Duke? She also said that, of course, her father also scolded her sometimes, but she considered such behavior too disrespectful. Lilica was ready to burst into tears. She said that the girl had treated them all very coldly, and now she understood that it was stupid to expect that she could change. Of course, this didn't bother Yuria at all. She simply stood and looked at her sister with an icy gaze. The only one who didn't change at all was, of course, Lilica. She was a poor, weak child who was an illegitimate child. And Yuria was the legitimate daughter who treated her the same way. Of course, everyone around saw only this side of the coin. This is exactly the image the girl created, weaving intrigues behind her half-sister's back. It was she who was the cause of Yuria's main troubles. At that moment, the Duke arrived. He turned to his own daughter and said that Lilica was right. She did not understand how the girl could call her own father that way. He was upset and dissatisfied with the fact that she treated him as if he were some kind of stranger. Lilica, seeing her father, immediately rejoiced, and the man continued talking to Yuria and said that he knew that she didn't like him. But still, extending his hand forward, the man said that she couldn't just give up on her family, even though she didn't like them. He asked her to take his hand because he wanted to accompany her. Yuria was shocked, but she knew perfectly well that nothing else could be expected from them. Then suddenly another guy came up to her from behind. It was Jackson, her brother. He also extended his hand to the girl and asked what she thought about the first dance with him. Then suddenly the Duke asked, was it really impossible without this? After all, he was trying to make peace with his daughter, and his brother was interfering in this conversation. Yuria was about to say something when suddenly another young guy ran up to them from behind. He extended his hand and asked her to dance with him. He said that there might not have been any tender feelings between them, but he would still like to do it. The men suddenly started arguing among themselves and asked, what feelings was he talking about after he proposed to Lilik in front of Yuria? The girl's father immediately said that he did not understand how the guy dared to show up at this event after that. Yuria, who stood to the side, simply watched all this and realized that it was pure chaos. But the girl was very surprised by the fact that they did not even think about how they treated her before. Her father was always yelling at her and defending Lilica. The man even sent his own daughter out of the house, so the girl had absolutely no idea what kind of reconciliation could be discussed after all this humiliation. Of course, the girl had pride, so she was not going to follow their lead and doubted whether these people had any conscience left at all. At that moment, another rather nice-looking man approached them. He extended his hand to Yuria and, asking for forgiveness, said that he had already promised her the first dance. Her brother and father immediately started looking around to find the person who said this, and when they saw the man, they were surprised. The man, who was wearing a nice green suit, apologized to the girl and said that he was just a little late, but didn't want to make her nervous. But Yuria immediately came closer to him and said that there was nothing to worry about, since he was delayed precisely because of her assignment. The girl's father was incredibly shocked by this turn of events, and his daughter walked up to the guy and grabbed his hand. With a smile on her face, she asked them all to meet her partner, but she didn't even mention his name. Frowning, the girl looked at her family and asked them to finally leave her alone. She no longer wanted to communicate with them. Yuria explained that her transformation from the ugly duckling that everyone laughed at into a beautiful swan had only just begun, so they still had a lot to learn about her new life. In fact, the girl remembered her first death very well. She came to her father and brother and begged for help. The weather was frosty and the floor was cold, and that day Yuri heard his father's unsympathetic voice. The man said that this was the last favor he would grant her, and also explained that he did not want to take the sword, so she had to act wisely. In fact, he offered his own daughter poison and called it mercy. Of course, the girl was shocked, but she had no choice. She thought it was best to go to her mother after meeting this death, rather than live such a life. So without thinking twice, she drank this poison. As soon as she took the first sip, she immediately felt very ill. Wine and blood poured out of her mouth, and she coughed very loudly. The girl couldn't stay on her feet. She fell to the ground. And then suddenly Jackson spoke up. telling his father that he was too kind and let her die so easily. The guy looked at her with the utmost disgust and said that after everything she had done, she deserved a more severe punishment. Then suddenly the father asked the boy to watch his language, because after all, she was his sister, and therefore he had to show at least some respect for her. But Jackson replied that he had no intention of doing so, because ever since Lilica had appeared, she was the only one he could consider his sister. He believed that from now on, no one should tarnish the reputation of Primrose's family, since this girl would soon no longer be alive. Yuria, while she was suffocating from this poison, understood that her family was already thinking about how to get rid of all traces of her existence while she was dying right before their eyes. And how her life could end like this? The girl could not even imagine. Those looks that looked at her, as if she was just some kind of trash that they burned. It was a tragic life, and Yuri was killed by her own family, and her loved one betrayed her. She thought it was all pointless and didn't understand why she came back, because she wanted to run away, but for some reason she changed her mind. And it really was like that. When she was running away from the estate, Veer suddenly grabbed her and even called her a villain, saying that she had no right to run away. She immediately looked at him in surprise and said that he couldn't do that to her. Once upon a time, she really loved this man, who was her fiancé. But just when the girl was about to save herself, she realized that no one in that world loved her. Of course, there was one person who loved her, and that was her mother. But she died very recently, and it was this woman who loved her sincerely with all her soul. As a child, Yuria could forget about everything in the arms of her loving mother. She was not at all bothered by the fact that her father did not pay attention to her, and her brother always made fun of her. Of course, the girl could not even imagine that she could die in such a worthless way. She couldn't believe that this was the end that awaited her, and after some time of suffering, her eyes finally began to close. As soon as Yuria lost consciousness, all her memories returned to her, namely that she found herself inside the novel. This was her second life, and after death, memories from the first came to her. She was sitting in a cafe with her friend, who had read the novel and said that such books were very popular at the time. And this story was called, I Ask for the Abandoned Princess for Love. She immediately began to tell her the plot of this book. The main character's name was Lilica, and the book told a story of how she suddenly went from being a simple girl to becoming part of the Duke's family. She was now an aristocrat, at first looked down upon because of her terrible low birth. But with her good nature and openness, she quickly won the love of her father and brother. This story was about how Lilica defeated her evil sister, who always envied her and wished only evil. In fact, despite the fact that the story was banal, the book turned out to be really good. Her friend also told her about that very Yuria Primrose. She was a typical antagonist, a secondary character. And this girl had to endure a collapse because of jealousy towards the main character, who received absolutely everything that the girl herself dreamed of. And when Yuria died, she could not understand why this realization came to her only now. All this time she was this heroine and understood this only at the end of her life's journey. She was the heroine of a novel that she had read in a past life on the advice of her dear friend. Of course, Yuria understood that if she had guessed about this earlier, it would have been easier for her. For example, as soon as Lilica appeared on the threshold of their house, she would have behaved completely differently. Her father and brother immediately fell in love with her and hated poor Yuria, who immediately guessed that something was wrong with the girl. Soon, of course, everyone took the side of this poor, illegitimate girl, and the more they loved her, the more they hated their own daughter. And even her fiancé betrayed the girl. He slept with her and demanded that she break off her engagement with Yuri, because he said that he loved her with all his soul. Now that girl understood why everyone hated her so much. It was all because of that horrible original story that everyone followed. And yet in the midst of all this darkness, she had one person, namely her mother, who became her light bearer. It was her mother who comforted the girl in moments of despair. And when Yuria was dying, she thought that she was going directly to her mother, and she was even very happy about it. In her thoughts, she said goodbye to everyone, to the Duke's terrible family and her worthless life. It was certainly an incredibly miserable death. However, once she lost consciousness, she found it in a completely new place. Little by little, opening her eyes, she suddenly heard a rather familiar voice next to her, and Yuria, waking up, immediately saw her mother in front of her. The woman smiled happily, greeted her, and said that she was very worried about her. As soon as Yuria saw her, she couldn't believe that it was really her. She couldn't even hold back her tears and even thought that she was sleeping. At that moment, her mother asked if everything was okay with her. She touched the girl's forehead, saying that she needed to check her temperature because she had been unconscious the whole time. But then suddenly Yuria grabbed her hand and squeezed it tightly. She immediately turned to her mother and asked where they were. The woman looked at her with concern and asked, "Are you still feeling unwell?" And also asked if she had had any nightmares. She also added that the doctor said that the temperature should go away very soon, and everything would return to its place as usual. As soon as Yuria heard about the nightmare, she immediately thought that it was all just her dream with a terrible ending. But thinking about everything that had happened to her during that time, she realized that it was not at all like a dream. It was too similar to her harsh reality. Then Yuria turned to her mother, asked if she had died, and asked if perhaps they were simply in heaven, and the woman did not want to upset her. Her mother immediately became worried. She took the girl by the hand and said that she could not even imagine that she felt so bad since she was talking such nonsense. She straightened the girl's hair and asked why she had to die, since she was only 19 years old and still had her whole life ahead of her. And hearing about her age, Yuria was very surprised because she didn't think that she was so young. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and the girl's brother and sister came in. And the woman, smiling happily, said that she was very glad that they had come. Of course, as soon as Lilica went inside and saw Yuria, she immediately started running to her and said that she was very glad that she woke up and that everything was okay with her. The girl, seeing her, was a little surprised, and she was especially wary of her brother Jackson, who was next to his half-sister. She wondered again if everything that had happened to her had been a dream, or if perhaps she had somehow simply gone back in time. At that moment, Mother smiled and said that they had arrived just in time, and also replied that she was going to go get the doctor and asked that the two of them look after Yuria. Lilica immediately said with a joyful smile that her mother did not have to rush or worry. Her little sister was now under the most responsible supervision. The woman thanked them and then turned around and walked out the door to actually call the doctor to examine her. Jackson, at this point, with his arms folded across his chest, was indignant. He said that the girl was talking about being sick, but she looked healthier than everyone else. He looked at his sister indignantly and said that she looked great, and asked if she wasn't tired of pretending to be sick at her adult age. The girl, hearing these words, was shocked. She did not think that he could say such a thing to his sister, who had just woken up, considering that she had been unconscious for a very long time. In fact, Yuria had already heard something similar when she became very ill, and her brother told her exactly the same thing. She understood that if it had been just a hallucination from the temperature, then the pain from the poison that her father had given her would not have been so vividly remembered in her body and head. The girl died in the winter after her 19th birthday, and her mother said that she had only just turned that age. So Yuria realized that it was not a dream. She had simply returned a year back in time and was somehow now alive. Jackson suddenly asked her again if she had really been sick all this time, his voice laced with distrust. But then suddenly he started being rude to her again and asked if she just wanted to ruin Lilica's birthday party because she envied her. His sister immediately became indignant and asked Jackson what he was even saying. Of course, Lilica didn't like all this because she was the kindest soul on the planet. Of course, Yuria was surprised that he could say such low words right before the death of his own sister. She still couldn't get it out of her head. And despite the fact that the girl returned in time, people still remained the same. They did not change. Their attitude towards her was still the most terrible. At that moment, Lilica smiled at Yuri and told her brother not to be so cruel because their sister was not guilty of anything. It was all an illness. She also told her that the girl should not pay attention to him, and smiling added that she was very glad that everything turned out to be okay with her in the end, because she was very worried. Of course, Yuria did not believe her words because behind that angelic smile hid a disgusting character, which was not at all as kind as everyone thought. She had always been a wolf in sheep's clothing, and she was even ashamed to admit that she had actually spent the night with Yuria's fiancé. But until now, they had, of course, kept a fairly large distance from each other, and now the girl had finally revealed her true face and who she really was. One day, when Yuria was sitting in her room before her death and embroidering, her sister came up to her and said that she was doing very well. She smiled and asked the girl if she could help her with this matter. She explained that there was something she wanted to do, but she was afraid she couldn't do it herself, so she decided to turn to her half-sister for help. If Yuria had only understood then what was hidden behind this, then of course, she would never have helped her do this. When one of the napkins was torn, Jackson suddenly began to scold Yuria for tearing the only thing that was left to Lilac in memory of her mother. He even hit the girl for this and said that they let her get away with a lot, but this was too much. He was not going to tolerate such antics. Of course, when her father found out about this, he also yelled at her, and Yuria tried to explain that she had never done anything bad to her, and of course, she would not have torn her scarf on purpose. The man then picked up the torn cloth and asked if she really meant to say that Lilica had ruined the scarf herself, but he also added that the servants had seen her pick it up. Yuria was amazed. She immediately explained that she took this scarf only to help her with embroidery, since Lilica herself asked for it. She tried to explain to her father that there had simply been some kind of misunderstanding, turned to her half-sister and asked why she had lied so brazenly. But at that moment, Lilica began to wipe away her false tears and said that it was all true. She asked her sister to unravel her scarf, but she could not even imagine that the girl would tear it on purpose. The maids who were present in the room and the other assistants were astonished. They could not believe that Yuria actually did this on purpose. They knew perfectly well that this was too much, because no matter how much she hated her sister, it was incredibly cruel of her to do this to the memory of her mother. Yuria couldn't understand why absolutely everyone was on her side. Since her tricks became even more sophisticated, this girl stole absolutely everything from her. Lilica did absolutely everything possible to turn her into a villain, and she actually succeeded in doing so. And now in her new life, when her stepsister looked at her with pity, the girl understood that all this was not sincere. Then suddenly she asked if she still had a fever, but Yuria didn't have time to answer because Jackson suddenly spoke up, saying that she was pretending and just wanted to ruin her holiday, that's all. The girl didn't even know what to answer. She was shocked by such terrible words, and their half-sister suddenly smiled and told her brother that such a thing definitely couldn't happen. With a smile on her face, Lilica said that the girl definitely had to come and make the holiday even more special. Then Yuria, smiling, answered that of course it was so, because she could not miss her birthday. She had waited for this moment for so long, so she would never have acted so cruelly. The girl also said that she would like to congratulate her sister in advance, and added that she was absolutely sure that the holiday would be unforgettable. In fact, for Yuria, that day was truly unforgettable. Lilica lied to her about the dress code for the holiday, and everyone laughed at the girl. She was also mocked by everyone because she had the idea to wear a similar dress to an event with a completely different dress code, although Yuria didn't even know this. Of course, she was not going to let Lilica do this to her anymore, and even decided to take revenge on everyone who had a hand in ruining her life. She, of course, wanted to start with Lilica. After that, she would have moved on to her father and brother, who simply went and poisoned her. Then she would move on to the man she once loved, who cheated on her with her sister and even helped kill Yuri. It was the young Lord Marcel Vieira. It was this man who was incredibly vile and deceitful. Yuria knew that this time everything had to be different. She wanted to save her mother and spark happiness, as she had always dreamed of. And she believed that if she really did somehow get a second chance, she decided to throw these terrible people out of her life and live the way she wanted. The first thing Yuria wanted to do was get rid of the one who treated her so terribly, and only after that would she be able to build her life normally. In order to avoid a tragic end, the girl decided not to hesitate, but to act immediately. And she started with Marcel, since it was easiest to resolve matters with him. The next day after she woke up, she immediately asked for an audience with this man, and when the man came in, he did not even say hello when he saw her. Yuria allowed him to enter, but she looked at this man with great disgust, since he was her fiancé, who had started an affair with her sister, driving her to despair. The man came closer to his bride and said that he heard that she was ill, and also asked if she had gotten better during the time they had not seen each other. Of course, this man behaved politely, but neither in his voice nor on his face was there a drop of concern for Yuri. Previously, his reserve did not bother the girl at all, and she thought that he was simply not talkative. But in fact, he turned out to be kind to her. He did come to visit her, even though she was sick. But the reality was that he was just looking for any excuse to see Lilica. Of course, Yuria had noticed similar behavior before, but she convinced herself that she was simply imagining it all and was wrong, although this was not at all the case. In his past life, The handkerchief he always carried in his breast pocket was decorated not with his family's crest, but with the Primrose family crest. Of course, lovers very often exchange handkerchiefs, but this particular example was not received from his bride. To be more precise, the girl once presented him with a scarf, saying that she had decorated it herself as an engagement gift for them, and the man said that he really appreciated it. He explained that since they were not yet married, he considered the gift burdensome and was therefore embarrassed to accept it. The girl then immediately asked him for forgiveness, but he simply went and coldly rejected her gift. And after that, somehow, he still got a handkerchief with their coat of arms and carried it with him all the time. Marcel turned to Yuria and said that she probably had not fully recovered yet, since she was rather quieter than usual. The girl looked at him with great disgust and anger and said that she was fine. Of course, he was not used to such an attitude from her, so he immediately began to notice something. Now she no longer smiled at him like an idiot. She was a completely different person, because she understood that Marcel was not at all the same person he had seen before. After some time of silence, Yuria again turned towards the window and said that she knew perfectly well that he had been in love with Lilica all this time. Hearing this, the man immediately became indignant and asked what she was talking about. And also worried, he said that there was simply some misunderstanding. Of course, the man was going to deny all of this. Even though he wasn't always very good at hiding it, he was going to hold his defense until the end. The girl, looking at him, said that he didn't need to justify himself. She saw everything and wasn't stupid at all, so as not to understand what was happening. The man was starting to get irritated by this. He raised his voice at her and said that if she was angry, she could take it out on him, but she didn't need to drag Lilica into all this. This made Yuri even more disgusted. She didn't understand what kind of great love it was that he even began to defend her there. She could tolerate any insolence. It certainly wouldn't frighten her, because she was dying, so his threats weren't scary to her at all. As the man came closer to her, she turned to him and, smiling, told him not to misunderstand her. She explained that she just wanted to say that she supported him and wanted to help him in this matter. Marcel was, of course, astonished to hear this, but he did not deny it any longer, but simply asked what she was going to do in such a case. The girl replied that she had been bedridden for a long time, and after clearing his throat, the man said that he had heard about it. In fact, he was late because he was very busy with work and therefore could not visit her immediately after his recovery. But Yuria didn't listen to him. She said that literally between life and death, she wondered how she could live all the time, caring only about her own happiness. She also said that she was incredibly sorry that she had behaved like a child all this time and that he had to fuss over her. She explained that breaking off an engagement was a common thing among aristocrats, but she was very afraid that her father would not be able to allow them to do so. And yet, despite this, she had one idea. She asked him if he would like to hear it out, since it was for his own good. She herself was very happy because everything was going according to her plan, which she was able to come up with, and she believed that the man needed to prepare to meet his end. Marcel did not object and listened attentively to the girl. Several days passed from that moment, and finally Lilica's birthday arrived. Yuria, of course, arrived at the event, and as soon as she walked inside, she was dressed in an incredibly beautiful blue evening dress. The aristocrats, upon seeing her, immediately began to whisper and talk about how she was always late, as if she were the main character. They also believed that she wanted to ruin Lilic's holiday, and that's why she came. But Yuria, meanwhile, approached her half-sister and greeted her. Hearing this, the girl immediately became happy, but as soon as she turned her head to the side and saw her sister's outfit, she was shocked. At that moment, Yuria, smiling happily, apologized for being late. She explained that an unpleasant situation had occurred, so she simply had to stay late. When she saw the expression on Lilica's face, she was happy, because the girl was very surprised. Of course, it was she who tried, telling the maid that the guests should come in red and very flashy outfits. However, pink was the birthday girl's color, and the guests were expected in blue since that was the original idea. This concept was invented by Lilica. In the past, she portrayed Yuri as an idiot who was ready to do anything because of her jealousy, and was even ready to ruin her birthday party. But now her trick certainly didn't work, and the girl came as expected, according to the dress code, so, of course, her sister was shocked by this. But Yuria believed that her sister shouldn't worry, because these weren't all the surprises she had prepared for her. She prepared very well for her birthday, so she wanted to celebrate it properly. At that moment, the doors to the hall suddenly opened, and Mr. Vieira, Yuria's fiancé, entered. And as soon as people heard him, they were amazed and did not understand why he was the only one wearing a suit in the same colors as Lilica. The girl herself, upon seeing him, was incredibly shocked, since she really did not understand why he wore pink, and who could have told him such a thing. She immediately approached the young gentleman and asked what was wrong with his clothes. Of course, Lilica didn't understand, because she hadn't told anyone what color her dress was supposed to be, so she couldn't even imagine how he could have found out about it. People immediately started talking about how he was engaged to Lady Eureka, but for some reason his outfit matched Lady Lilica's dress perfectly. They even suggested that there was some deep connection between them that only lovers had. Lilica, laughing nervously, understood perfectly well that nothing good should have come out of this. They would definitely be misunderstood because of this misunderstanding. So the girl turned to the man and said that he was mistaken, because the guests were supposed to wear blue, not pink. But the guy didn't even let her finish. He interrupted the girl and said that he wasn't mistaken at all. Smiling happily, the man replied that after she gave him the scarf she had embroidered, he couldn't bear the thought that everyone was sure that he had received it from Yuria. And since it wasn't true, he certainly didn't want to lie to everyone's face. At that moment, he took out that same handkerchief and handed it to the girl. Lilica was incredibly surprised. She did not understand why he said such things right in front of everyone, and on her birthday too. But the man replied that it was incredibly difficult for him too, but he could no longer hide his feelings as they were eating him up from the inside. At that moment, he got down on one knee and, putting his hand on his heart, asked the girl to marry him. Yuria, who was standing not far from them at that moment and watching what was happening, was very pleased, since everything was going exactly according to her brilliant and evil plan. The groom she was crazy about in her past life turned into a puppet in her hands, so the result even exceeded all her expectations. Of course, when Lilica's father found out about all this, he was incredibly angry. He considered this man a real idiot and did not understand how he dared to do such a thing. He had simply made a laughingstock of their family, and so the man considered him shameless, a young upstart trying to rise at their expense, and that was simply appalling in his opinion. Meanwhile, Mom consoled Yuria because she understood that her daughter probably had a broken heart. But the girl was not upset at all. Everything turned out even better than she expected. She took advantage of Lilica's tactics and told her what she needed. She said that the young master must have known very well that the Duke of their house cared very much about what others thought of him. That's why, even at that meeting, she said that if people started saying what a beautiful couple they were, then of course the Duke would accept them and would not be against it in any way. She also said that he should have thought about it, because this was his last chance to contact their family, since she really wanted to break off that engagement. The man, having heard about this, immediately understood that if he got married, he would no longer be able to see Lilica, and Yuri was not at all attracted to him. He only went for the sake of her sister. He was going to act like a real man for the sake of his beloved Lilica, so he proposed to her right at her birthday party. Of course, he knew what color her dress was supposed to be, but the girl couldn't even imagine that he could put on such a lavish show. Now there were many rumors about Lilica. People did not understand how it was possible to understand this and what was going on in Primrose's house at all if they went to such lengths. And as a result, the reputation of their family, which the father valued so much that he did not even worry about his own children, suffered. Yuria sighed heavily and answered her father that she was fine. The main thing was that Lilica was happy. She also explained that she did not want to be a hindrance to them, so she decided to retreat. She decided that this was exactly how she should behave. But the man became even more angry because of this and did not understand what kind of happiness she was even talking about. The man replied that no one should dare to tarnish the name of his family, but this uncouth man simply did so. Yuria at this point began to cry and asked her father for forgiveness. She said that she did not want to disgrace their family and also said that she was very sorry. Mom, seeing all this, was shocked. She immediately asked the girl not to say such things because it was not true at all. With a heavy sigh, the girl said that she really hoped that Lilica and Marcel would be happy together. She explained her position by the fact that he had cooled towards her because she was not good enough. And since he was in love with another, the girl certainly could not be suitable for him. But before she could finish her sentence, there was a knock at their door. Then Jackson came in with his sister. The Duke became very angry when he saw them and began shouting again, asking why he had to call them separately and why they did not come at once. The brothers stood before Lilica and said that their good name had been tarnished and he was very sorry. But he asked him to listen to them carefully because Lilica also suffered in this situation. He explained that she had indeed given Marcel the handkerchief. There had been nothing between them, so he felt that there was absolutely no need to break off the engagement with Yuria. But now that the girl understood perfectly well how Lilica acted, she decided to do the same. Find someone to push all the dirty work onto and just sit and keep quiet. The Duke was still very angry. He clenched his fist and asked Jackson if he had gone crazy to say such things. As soon as the boy heard this, he was shocked. He immediately asked his father why he thought so at all. The Duke continued to shout, saying that after the disrespect shown, for some reason he still suggested leaving everything as it was. He said that they should have broken off the engagement immediately, of course, and he didn't understand at all how the guy could have come up with something like that. But Jackson suddenly interrupted him and was about to explain what he wanted to say, when suddenly Lilica burst into tears and continued to stand silently. The father looked directly at her and asked her to explain to him why the hell she gave that scarf to her sister's fiancé. When Lilica remained silent because she was very upset and scared, he shouted at her again and asked her to say at least a word. Yuria also began to look at her very closely and attentively, as she was interested in what she was going to do. Then Lilica came forward and told her father that her sister was not very good at embroidering, so he asked her to embroider the scarf. She was ready to swear that there had been nothing between them and there could not have been. She also said that she was afraid to even imagine how it could have happened, that young Master Vera had misunderstood everything. The girl cried again and said that she was truly sorry that everything turned out this way, and Yuria was shocked because she did not think that the girl was going to justify herself with such methods. The Duke sighed heavily at that moment and said that even if he had really asked her about it, she was a smart girl, and he did not understand how she could act so stupidly and recklessly. Lilica said again that she was really very sorry. She also added that in that place everyone had a fine education and manners, but she wondered if it mattered so much where she was born. Yuria, sighing heavily, immediately understood perfectly well that the girl was again trying to press on pity with her terrible low origin and all that sort of thing. Then her father asked her to leave these thoughts behind, because it was not her fault, but this stupid man's. At that moment, Yuria thought that now was the best time to strike. But then her mother suddenly spoke up. She said that everything was right. It was completely unimportant. The woman smiled and said that she was already part of their family, so it made no difference where the girl was born. Lilica was very pleased and thanked her for it, but then the woman suddenly became very serious and asked how it happened that their outfits somehow matched perfectly. She told the girl that she had to explain herself, and as soon as Yuria heard this, she was very happy because that was exactly what she wanted to say. She was also a little surprised because it was the first time her mother spoke in such a stern voice and even demanded something. Lilica hesitated for a moment. She simply spoke some unintelligible words and tried to think of how to explain all this. And finally, smiling nervously, she wondered if it couldn't just be some awkward and unfortunate coincidence. But Mother continued to insist on her own and replied that all the other guests were wearing blue. Only the two of them were dressed in pink. She explained that she found it very hard to believe that it was a mere coincidence. After all, it didn't look like that at all. Yuria also decided to intervene in this conversation and said that her mother was right. Lilica did not need to hide anything anymore because she could understand and accept everything. She was incredibly happy because now her sister had fallen into her own trap and had to somehow get out of this situation. Lilica immediately turned to her little sister and said in an alarmed voice that she had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. Of course, she understood everything, but she was just pretending. But Jackson couldn't take it anymore at that moment. He, who had been standing silently all this time, shouted, saying that he thought Lilic was the worst in this situation. The guy explained that they simply did not see the full picture and asked them to stop defending Yuria, only because she was their own daughter. As soon as the mother heard this, she was amazed. She immediately turned to her son and asked what he had said. Yuri understood perfectly well that he simply couldn't say anything to his father when he was scolding Lilica, so he decided to take it out on his mother. She was surprised that the guy could treat the woman who raised them and loved all her biological and adopted children in this way. With her head down, The girl turned to her father and said that she thought there was no point in discussing this situation between themselves because they would never come to a common conclusion. Therefore, she suggested inviting young Mr. Veer into this room so that he could explain the situation from his point of view. The man thought seriously about this proposal because he himself understood that this way they would not come to a definite point of view. So, turning to his entire family, he said that it was best to do as Yuria suggested. It was the only option in his opinion. Jackson immediately became indignant. He told his father that Lilika's situation at that moment was terrible, and he did not think it was right to act like that. But the guy didn't even have time to finish speaking, because the man slammed his hand on the table and told him to finally come to his senses. He said that no matter what Lilika's situation was, they couldn't leave it like that. He, the heir to the family, was acting like a real fool for reasons he didn't understand. Lilika already wanted to defend her older brother, but the Duke waved his hand and said that he didn't want to listen to anything else. The man asked that this boy be brought to them. He had to answer for everything and explain himself. So after some time, he actually came. Marcel, as soon as he entered, immediately bowed and replied that he could not even imagine that such a commotion could arise, and also said that he was incredibly sorry. He said that he was only the son of an earl and was not worthy of their attention, but he really loved Lady Lilika very much, and therefore asked for their blessing. As soon as the girl heard this, she was shocked. She did not understand at all what this idiot was saying. Lilika decided to take matters into her own hands. She turned away from him and told her father that Mr. Veyer's feelings were not mutual, so she thought it was wrong. As soon as Marcel heard this, he was astonished, and the girl asked his forgiveness for this misunderstanding. She explained that she had been kind to him only because he was her sister's fiancé, but she had absolutely no feelings for this man, so she considered this engagement completely irrational. Marcel, hearing this, was amazed. He did not understand what kind of nonsense the girl was talking about, because he thought completely differently. And Yuria noticed that she was able to get rid of him quickly, but she also thought that there was nothing surprising about this, since Lilika was a master at this business. But when she looked at her half-sister, she noticed that for the first time in her life she was so worried. She loved to create problems for others, but for the first time she herself fell into such a trap. Then suddenly Marcel turned to her and asked why she had given him the handkerchief in that case. He replied that she understood perfectly well what all this meant to him, and that is why he took this gift as a declaration of his feelings. Lilika immediately screamed and said that she gave it to him only because the gentleman himself asked him about it. He said that her sister did not know how to sew at all and therefore wanted to have at least something. But he began to protest again and said that he remembered perfectly well what she had told him when she had handed him the thing. She actually hugged the man and said that she loved him, but because of Yuri, they couldn't be together. Lilika also told him then that although she was upset, she always intended to maintain her feelings for him. The man immediately said these words, and the Duke, hearing this, suddenly asked what it all meant. Lilika was incredibly worried at that moment. She was completely confused and did not know what to do in such a situation, since she never even thought that she could find herself in it. She started crying again and said that he was just upset, and that was why he made up all these things. She said that it was a lie and also asked her father to believe her, because she could never say such a thing. Yuria watched her sister with a stony face. She really didn't expect that this one situation could cause such a big stir. Marcel turned to her again in an upset voice and asked, was she really just afraid of Yuri, and that's why she decided to cover herself up in this way? Without even waiting for her answer, he immediately said that she had already blessed them, so the girl should not worry about this. As soon as Lilika heard about this, she was immediately surprised. She turned to the man and asked what he meant. Then the mother spoke up and asked in an icy voice how they dared to involve Yuri in this whole story. The woman also said that no matter what happened between them, he still had to apologize to Yuria, but instead he simply accused her of lying. When she said that he had no conscience, the man immediately replied that there had been a misunderstanding. He had not wanted to blame Yuria for this at all. Then the Duke spoke. He told them to stop everything and not say a single word. The man said that first the guy slandered Lilika, and now he decided to slander Yuri too. Of course, this was already going beyond all bounds of what was permissible. The girl turned to Marcel and told the gentleman that he had behaved inappropriately by insulting her and her sister. The man couldn't believe that things had really turned out this way. He thought there had been some kind of misunderstanding, but absolutely everyone in that family was against him. He didn't know what happened because he clearly remembered how Lilica confessed her love to him. He even believed that she wouldn't lie to him. And so he guessed that Yuria was probably to blame for everything. He immediately turned to her and asked, was it really she who did all this? He was amazed and asked the girl, was it really true that she had intimidated Lilica? And because of this, she now refused to confess her feelings. Yuria looked at him and immediately asked why she had to do this at all. The girl herself understood perfectly well that with such methods the man was simply digging himself an even deeper hole. But Marcel didn't realize this, so he immediately asked why Lilica had rejected him in that case. After all, she had promised to help, but she was plotting behind his back. He yelled again and said that she had always been a villain, so he wasn't surprised that she did it again and set him up. Yuria was surprised to hear the phrase that she was a villain. Then suddenly the Duke said that he did not intend to listen to all this anymore. He said that of course he wasn't going to let someone like him marry either Lilik or Yuri. His daughters deserved more. He also said that he would break off the engagement and send an official letter to the Count, stating that Marcel now had nothing to do with their family. Jackson, when he heard all this, was shocked. He could not believe that the guy was such an idiot and ruined everything that could be done. When the Duke asked for the boy to be taken away, everyone finally dispersed. Yuria went to her bedroom with her mother. The Duchess replied that she had never thought that Marcel could be such a person. He had caused all this commotion and insulted her own daughter. She hugged Yuri and said that she wanted to marry another girl to him, so she asked for forgiveness for not immediately seeing what kind of person he was. But Yuria, hugging her back, replied that she herself had not suspected. Everything was fine after all. It was she who had insisted on this engagement, so the mother did not need to blame herself. The girl herself understood that he was not just an idiot in love. He was a vile, cruel man who forcibly dragged her into the house when she wanted to escape. Yuria looked her mother in the eye with a joyful smile and said that, thanks to this, she was able to learn a very important lesson for herself. Mother replied that she was personally going to deal with the dissolution of the engagement and talk to her father, so the girl did not need to worry about anything else. But she suddenly took her mother by the hand and said that she wanted to tell her something very important. Yuria knew that her mother was about to die, but she simply didn't have the courage to tell her directly because it was too hard and painful. She decided to simply tell about her feelings so that she would never regret it again. With her head down, Yuria told her mother that from now on she was going to take care of everything herself, so she asked her to just take care of herself and not worry about family matters. She advised her to take care of her health because it was very weak, and if the woman had overburdened herself, then everything could have turned out very badly. Yuria explained that she was very afraid for her and did not want her to worry about her anymore. At that moment, her mother took the girl by the hand and said that she had thought a lot about everything and believed that if she had not interfered in all this, then everything would have turned out well. But now she noticed that it was a mistake. She decided to go out more often, to attend various clubs. She really wanted to protect and support her daughter because she should not allow any rudeness towards her. As soon as Yuria heard these pleasant words, she immediately burst into tears again. She was very sad because she knew what a terrible end awaited her mother. In her past life, her mother died just a few months before her 20th birthday from lead poisoning. In this world, technology developed slowly, and until now, a lot of lead was actually added to various cosmetics, which had a terrible effect on health. Many aristocrats died from lead poisoning because they used this horrible, deadly cosmetic every day. Her mother was in poor health, rarely left the house, and hardly used cosmetics. She was much less susceptible to poisoning than other noble women, and yet her mother died a tragic death. She became the first aristocrat to die from lead cosmetics among women of the same age. Of course, Yuria tried to prove all this to her father so that no one else would die, but the Duke didn't listen to her. Even when Yuria asked if it seemed strange to him that her mother used makeup so rarely, but for some reason went and died. Even in such a situation, he simply shouted at her. Once after the funeral, he even slapped her in the face and told her to shut up and never say such a thing again. The man told her that she used powder that contained lead in order to look good. And for this reason, he did not understand why she had started this whole terrible conversation. As in her past life, her mother was the only person who supported the girl in any situation. And so Yuria understood that only she could and should protect her. And this time, the girl definitely did not intend to lose her. She wanted to make the maximum effort to save her. She was going to do everything possible to make sure that they were both happy now. And so Yuria was serious. After what happened, Lilica did not catch the girl's eye for quite a long time. Jackson was also a little scared, so they stopped these stupid attacks on Yuria, so the girl had some time to live a quiet life. Thanks to this, the girl was able to calmly spend all this time alone with her mother and not feel any horror. One day, when they were sitting in the gazebo over a cup of tea, Yuria told her mother that she had heard about a festival that was supposed to start in a few days, and she asked if her mother would like to go there with her. Of course, the woman did not refuse and, smiling happily, said that she would be all for it. Of course, Yuria, upon hearing about this, immediately became happy and told her mother that she was very happy to hear this. The longer her happiness lasted, the more anxious she actually became. She knew perfectly well that her mother was going to die soon, and this thought simply killed her. Yuri couldn't shake the thought that someone could have deliberately taken and poisoned her mother, and she thought that if someone had done this, it would most likely have been Lilica. Of course, the girl understood perfectly well that just a suspicion was not enough. No one would believe her word, so she had to come up with something else. But even if that was the case, Yuria knew that if someone wanted to harm her dear mother, then she had to find that person as soon as possible and punish him according to his deserts. Of course, she was a little sad because she didn't even have anyone to turn to for help in this matter, and her mother, who was sitting opposite the girl, immediately suspected something was wrong. She anxiously asked Yuria what was happening to her. The girl immediately realized that she was too excited, so she answered that nothing like that. At that moment, her mother suddenly started coughing very hard. The girl immediately ran up to her and asked if she was okay because she was really worried. She even wondered if her mother had started coughing up blood because this cough was really strong. But then Yuria suddenly remembered that when her mother died, she carefully examined all the dishes, and they were in perfect order. But then she began to think that perhaps something had been mixed into her food while it was being cooked, and that was why it was having such a terrible effect on her health. The girl was silent for a while, but then she stood up from her seat and said that she would like to speak urgently with the butler. She and her mother went into the room to talk to the butler, and after a while the man asked if they had called him. Yuria immediately looked at the butler. She knew that his family had served the Primrose family for several generations, and these people were respected, and many listened to them. This butler was a good man, but he did not show due respect to Yuria. She assumed that he probably thought she was unworthy of the Primrose name, so he showed it openly. Yuria asked the man to take her to the kitchen because she wanted to see something about it. As soon as the man heard about this, he was very surprised and immediately asked why she had to go to the kitchen, since aristocrats usually did not show up there. He also wondered if something had happened. Perhaps they didn't like the food, and if that was the case, he wanted her to tell him, and he would then pass it on directly to the cooks. But Yuria replied that it was not that at all. She suddenly needed to go to the kitchen, where she usually did not go, and she understood perfectly well why this seemed rather strange to him. After all, he usually did all these things. But if she wanted to count someone out, she would manage without his help, and she wondered if he thought that she had called him for a reason. The man was very surprised to hear about this, and Yuria also said that they could discuss it later, because it was not so important at that moment. She needed his help first and foremost. The butler immediately bowed, asked for forgiveness, and said that he had been meddling in something that was none of his business. Therefore, he was really very sorry that he had allowed himself to behave like that. So immediately after that, the three of them went to the kitchen. In fact, the girl asked the butler to go with her for a reason. Because the servants doubted him, and they needed the influence and trust that the butler himself enjoyed. Well, then suddenly they stopped at the front door, and the butler asked him to tell her something before they went in. Yuria didn't intend to wait for him any longer, so she walked around him from the other side and abruptly opened the doors to the kitchen. As soon as the cooks, who were already preparing their dinner, saw her, they were very surprised because they did not expect that anyone would come to them at all. The butler immediately turned to them and asked them to greet Lady Yuria properly. One of the head cooks immediately asked what had brought her to this place, and Yuria replied that she saw that they were all very busy, but they should stop and quickly take their hands off the food. The cooks were amazed by such a request, and the girl walking between the rows also said that they should look at her at this time. She explained that she wanted to make sure of something, and therefore they all had to see it and not hide anything under any circumstances. In fact, the most terrible thing Yuria faced in her past life was not her death at all. It was the death of her dear mother. Because as soon as the woman died, Yuria locked herself in her room and started studying a lot of things, because she couldn't just accept the fact that her mother was no longer alive. The maids who constantly tried to bring her food always left with full plates because the girl refused to even eat. They really hoped that she would be okay because they were afraid that she could bring herself to the grave. They were also very interested in what Yuria was doing, since she sat there for several days and did not come out at all. The girl then really wanted to find out why her mother died and who was to blame. To avoid this, she sat for days on end in a dark room and studied various information about diseases and other things. But even despite all this research, Yuria in her past life would never have even thought that someone could have poisoned her through food. Fortunately, she had a second option, and so the girl was going to carefully check everything in her new life in order to avoid such misunderstandings again. The syrup that her mother constantly added to her food could be poisoned, and she, of course, prayed that it was not, but still had to double-check everything. She also understood that if there was really something wrong with this syrup, then the person who was involved in all this and was in the kitchen at the time was to blame. Yuria was never going to let that happen again. She couldn't bear to see her mother die again. So even though everyone thought she was crazy, she wanted to get justice. The girl turned to those present and asked if all the people who usually worked in the kitchen were present there at that moment. One of the cooks said that this was indeed the case, and also asked in an alarmed voice what had actually happened. The maid who usually brought out the food replied that if she needed anything, they could just say so, and it would be brought to her right away. But Yuria said that wasn't true. She was going to sort it out herself and added that if they wanted to help her, they should have just watched what was happening carefully. And at that very moment, the girl took out a small bag from her skirt pocket, which contained several blue flowers. Of course, the girl's mother was shocked. She had already turned to her and wanted to ask something, but she completely ignored her and did not pay attention to her. The butler himself was amazed. He could not even imagine that the young lady could have such a steely character and even try to prove something. Many of the cooks at that moment looked at the girl without taking their eyes off her, not understanding why these flowers were needed at all. Meanwhile, Yuria approached a huge cauldron in which the very same gravy that her mother constantly added to food was being prepared. The girl took out one of the flowers and threw it straight into the pot. She did this with great confidence because she knew that if her guesses were correct, then a reaction was bound to occur. The cook, who just happened to see this, was amazed and asked, "Was there really something wrong with the dish that was served to the hostess, since she came to check it like that?" The butler immediately looked at him with an angry look and told him not to get in their way, but to just stand and remain silent. In fact, the plant that Yuria threw into the cauldron with sauce was bakos, and it bloomed absolutely all year round. It was rarely used in medicine, being mistaken for an ordinary wildflower, since it really looked unremarkable. However, in reality, this flower was very useful, because when it reacted with lead, everything around caught fire, and a huge black smoke appeared. And the moment Yuria did this, the reaction actually happened. A huge black smoke poured out of that cauldron of sauce, making it even a little difficult for people to breathe. And besides, they felt a very strange smell coming from there. People immediately began to talk among themselves, not understanding what had happened. In fact, the flower produced toxic fumes that turned the lead black, and the flower itself completely dissolved. That's what happened in that sauce. Thus, the girl realized that she was able to find the culprit, so she addressed everyone present. Yuria said that this syrup was used to make a dessert that was served to her mother, so she would really like to know who made it. The cooks immediately started whispering among themselves. Of course, this terrible smell spread throughout the entire kitchen, and it was simply disgusting. Then the pink-haired girl raised her hand up. She was a little scared because she did not understand what was happening, because she did not consider herself guilty of anything. Yuria immediately looked at her with a very angry look and asked how long she had been doing this. She knew very well that this maid was Lilia's personal maid, so she was very wary. The girl immediately replied that she had joined the service about 6 months ago and had been making this syrup ever since, and also asked if there was something wrong because she did not understand what the problem was. But Yuria did not listen to her. She turned to the butler. Mai asked if he had seen what had happened at all. The man, bowing, immediately answered that he had seen everything and understood perfectly well. Then the girl pointed towards this maid with her hand and told them to call the guards and also grab this girl because she was trying to kill the Duchess. Once all the other chefs heard this, they were shocked. They couldn't believe that she actually tried to kill her. But Yuria explained that they had just seen the result of a chemical reaction between the flour and lead. This meant that the pot was made entirely of lead, so cooking in it was mortally dangerous for anyone's health. It had a slow but destructive effect. The maid was shocked. Her whole body began to shake with fear. She said, "Mistress, what happened?" Some misunderstanding, since she knew nothing about it and, of course, did not want to poison the Duchess. But at that moment, the butler suddenly shouted. He pointed his finger at her and asked, did she really not understand the seriousness of the whole situation? He explained to her that she was accused of attempted murder, which was a very serious matter, so she shouldn't act as if she didn't understand anything. The maid immediately asked her mistress to spare her and said that it was not her fault, the saucepan. She didn't even know anything about it. The thing was that as soon as the girl started working, Lilica immediately approached her and said that she didn't have to be afraid. If she needed something, she just had to say it. The girl wanted to give her more support and help. And as soon as the maid contacted her, the first impression was, of course, excellent. She realized that people were telling the truth, that the girl really was very nice and caring. Lilica, smiling happily, once said that they were almost the same age. So the girl explained that it was for this reason that she was worried about her. She also asked if the maid had any difficulties, because she knew that she was preparing desserts in the kitchen. The maid, hanging her head, replied that, of course, it was quite difficult to prepare syrup in such a large and heavy saucepan, but she was new, so she did not even know whether it was possible to complain about such a thing. Of course, Lilica, hearing this, was immediately happy. She, smiling slyly, said that she herself noticed this while watching the girl cook. So that day she handed her this pot, saying that she could use it because it was much more convenient and lighter. Of course, the maid was incredibly happy at that moment because it really made her job easier. She thanked her mistress and was surprised that such a noble lady as she was worried about a simple servant. Of course, the girl could not even imagine that there could be lead in that saucepan and that it had a very bad effect on the lady's health. At that moment, the maid really thought that she had been very kind, but now she had to defend herself and told everyone that she had not wanted to harm the Duchess at all. The maid also explained that Lady Lilica probably didn't know about this herself. She was sure that there would be a logical explanation for this if you dug a little deeper. Yuria, hearing this, was shocked. She could not understand what explanation there could be when she almost killed a man, and a duchess at that. Her mother loved this dessert very much and ate it absolutely every day. The dishes were always different, but the dessert remained the same. Of course, Yuria thought that using such a pot, it would be much easier to poison her mother than with just poison, since no one would suspect it. This was the reason why her mother died that time. So Yuria turned to the butler and told them to bring Lilica. The man yelled at one of the cooks and told him to quickly follow her and bring her to the kitchen. The guy immediately went there. But Yuria understood perfectly well that it would be very difficult to prove her case with her half-sister. When they called her to them, they immediately asked. Lilica answered that it was true, it was she who gave the maid the pot. She explained that she felt incredibly sorry for the maid because she was having such a hard time, and for this reason, she decided to ease her suffering. As soon as the maid heard this, she immediately beamed with joy. She was incredibly grateful to her mistress for telling the truth. But the butler still turned to her and asked her to tell him where she got that saucepan from. Lilica made the most unnoticeable expression on her face and explained that she bought it on a street she often visited as a child. She was recently walking there and went to see a merchant. He was talking about how this pot was not only beautiful, but also very durable. So the girl had no idea that it was made of lead. The butler immediately asked what street they were talking about, and also whether she remembered what the merchant looked like. Lilica, asking for forgiveness, said that, unfortunately, she did not remember anything. People around immediately began to whisper. They could not believe that she really brought a saucepan from the street, which she bought from God knows who, and gave it to just a servant. Many of the maids were furious about this, because this was not some ordinary servant, but the one who prepared desserts for the mistress herself. Lilica, who heard this, immediately started screaming. She asked if it seemed strange to them, because they knew that she herself ate this dessert, like her mother and sister. She explained that of course she wouldn't have eaten it, much less served it to others, if she'd known how dangerous it was. The girl burst into tears and said that she'd simply made a mistake, so she didn't understand why everyone was blaming her. Yuria, hearing all this, was incredibly angry, because it was a nasty snake, not a sister. She again tried to wriggle out of it at the expense of her position. But she clearly remembered how the girl often refused dessert, saying that she felt bad. And one day when it happened again, Yuria saw that the girl was coughing heavily and asked if it was worth calling a doctor to check on her health. She hadn't actually eaten dessert for 6 months, and she had quite a sweet tooth, so it was quite strange. Thus, Lilica simply deliberately tried to poison her mother and Yuria herself. Her mother was much older, so it was obvious that it affected her immediately. But if Yuria had continued to eat these desserts, she herself could have been poisoned and died. The girl turned to her sister and said that she did not know where the pot came from. However, it was quite obvious that untested dishes could not be used, much less given to someone. Looking at Lilik and the maid, she asked if they both understood this, and also if they realized the full responsibility of this situation. Of course, Yuria understood perfectly well that someone had to be punished, and usually the one who had the most influence ended up being the one who got punished. However, at that moment, the same maid suddenly turned to Lilik and asked if she remembered that it was she who insisted that the girl use that saucepan. Lilica, hearing these words, immediately became angry. She wondered, was the girl completely crazy? Did she really think she ordered to use untested cookware for cooking? She explained that she had told her clearly that the pot was just a decoration, and therefore she should not have cooked with it, and also asked doubtfully if the girl was trying to say that she had lied. Of course, the maid was shocked. She couldn't believe that this was really happening, because now she would be blamed for everything. Yuria, watching everything that was happening, understood perfectly well that this was a dishonest girl who had made a mistake. She had set up another without thinking, just to get out of the water dry herself. In her past life, this girl would have done anything for her. But now everything was completely different. And when the maid looked at her with surprise and incomprehension, Lilica did not answer her. The cooks and maids around immediately began to talk among themselves, not understanding what had happened at all, or how they should deal with this situation. Yura understood perfectly well that Lilica was even worse than it seemed at first glance. So now her revenge would be even more thought out, since she had to suffer serious punishment for her actions. In the end, everyone blamed the poor maid who used untested dishes, and the situation was soon forgotten. Even though the maid actually admitted her guilt and said that she was wrong, the punishment was still very severe. The maid tried to get through to Lilica and asked her to tell the truth, but it was all useless. These requests could even make things worse. Of course, there were a lot of rumors about this after that. People didn't understand how a lead pan could be used, and the lady could die from it. When the situation was resolved and the maid was taken out, Mom suddenly began to lose consciousness. Yuria and the butler were able to catch her so that she did not fall to the ground. The Duchess immediately asked in an alarmed voice, "Why did the maid have to do all this? Did she really not think about the consequences at all? And how could she do such a thing?" Since then, Lilik and her servants did not live as calmly as before. Of course, the girl now understood perfectly well that her position had been shaken, but she did not know how Yuria could have found out about it. She really thought her plan was great and no one would be able to find out about it, but somehow the girl tried. She even thought about the fact that perhaps one of her close people, whom she trusted, could betray her. But since then, Lilica really stopped trusting her servants, to whom she had previously opened up completely. Now she walked more secretly and made various plans on her own. When the next day came in the morning, as always, the mother and Uriah were sitting in the gazebo, and the woman thanked the girl with all her heart for saving her. Of course, the daughter understood that she was very scared because of the recent events. For some time, she lost an incredible amount of weight because she was under a lot of stress. But Yuria told her mother that it was too early to relax. She was constantly eating desserts from lead dishes, so it was unknown how much this affected her health. The girl said that she was no longer allowed to use anything containing lead. Of course, the woman did not argue, because she understood that her health depended on it. In order to change the subject a little, Yuria suddenly began to take something out of her pocket, saying that she had prepared a small gift for her. The woman was very surprised and immediately asked, "What is this?" Then the girl put a small container on the table and explained that it was a moisturizing cream made from calendula flowers. Yuria also explained that she could use it without any problems because she made it herself. It was a very useful product, so she hoped that her mother would like it. As soon as the woman saw this, she was immediately surprised and asked, "What was it for?" After all, she really didn't understand. Yuria, smiling, explained that she had very dry skin. With a moisturizer, it would look much better. She would no longer have to use that powder. But the woman was still amazed because she thought that calendula only bloomed at a certain time and was very difficult to obtain. Smiling happily, the daughter replied that she used her ability for this because it was really very useful. But mother, hearing about this, was very surprised. She could not believe that it was really true. In fact, the novel said that the members of the Primrose family had a special power that was passed down from generation to generation. It was this power that was called a blessing. Jackson had the special power of the ball, and Lilica's healing power, which had not yet fully manifested, was also strong. But Yuria got the power of growth. Of course, in that life, when the girl tried to test this power on people or animals, everything was useless. It did not work that way. The girl was in real despair about this, since the power only worked on plants. She considered it completely useless in this case. Of course, Yuria was upset. She couldn't believe that this was all she could do, while her brother could perfectly wield a sword and protect, and her half-sister could heal. After doing some research, Yuria was able to learn something about her ability. She could quickly grow plants in absolutely any conditions, even unfavorable ones. And the plants she grew had a special power that was very useful. In her past life, Yuria died long before she could find a use for her ability. But in this life, she was determined to figure out how to make the most of it. After going through several options, she realized that the best one was making cosmetics. Her passion for cosmetics turned out to be very useful, since she knew many different compositions and how they were made in general. She smiled at her mother and immediately asked if she would like to try it. The woman, a little wary, applied it to her hand and asked if the girl really thought it was worth it. But as soon as she felt this cream, she was amazed because the texture was very soft and the smell was pleasant. It was incredible for her. Seeing such sincere joy on her mother's face, Yuria immediately smiled and said that it was very good that she was not allergic to these substances. Then the girl took her mother's hand and began to slowly rub in the cream to help her with this. And as soon as the woman felt all this, she was amazed. She immediately hugged her daughter and said that she had not noticed before how much Yuria tried for all this. Her mother even burst into tears. She said in a voice trembling with despair that she had done so much for her, and she hadn't even noticed it before. Of course, Yuria was a little shocked, but she was incredibly pleased that her mother now showed such attention to her, and she was simply happy to spend time with her. At that very time, a prince named Enoch, being in his estate, was already ready to go on a visit. The butler, who was his personal assistant, bowed and told His Highness that everything was ready. The man immediately thanked him for this and said that in that case he was about to leave. Some time passed since then, and many different aristocrats gathered in the house for the event. Yuria was there too. The girls came up to her and said that they were very happy that she had joined them, even though she had only recently become active. They also said that they had noticed that she was becoming more beautiful every day. Yuria thanked them sincerely, and they said that nothing less could be expected from the Duchess of Primrose. They were all always delightfully beautiful and polite. The girl immediately thanked them for the compliments and said that she hoped that everything was fine with them. The aristocrats immediately noticed that her skin had become incredibly smooth. So they immediately started asking how the girl managed to achieve this. And the Duchess, who also came to that event, said that there was nothing special about it, she just used cream. The girls, hearing all this, were immediately delighted and asked if this was really the secret of her radiant beauty. One of the aristocrats immediately asked her to tell what cream she used, because she was really very interested and wanted to try it on herself too. The Duchess smiled and replied that she had been asked not to tell them about it yet, but she would be able to tell them everything very soon as everything was finally ready. Yuria, who was watching all this from the side, was happy that her mother looked amazing, and also incredibly happy because she was now getting a lot of attention again. Her mother decided to go out more often to protect Yuria, and this, of course, bore fruit. From that moment on, there was no more talk about Mr. Vietra or Lilica. The focus was, of course, on her mother because she really did look absolutely stunning. Of course, all the aristocrats were very interested in who created such a wonderful cream, and also how she could meet such a brilliant person, because it really had a wonderful effect. Yuria, when she noticed that her mother was surrounded by girls on all sides, realized that they would definitely not let her go so easily. And because of this, she was not very happy, because she knew that such attention also had its downsides. When some time passed and Yuria, together with her mother, was walking around the city, she noticed that she no longer had time to be bored as before. The woman said that this was indeed the case. She had recently started receiving a lot of different invitations to events, but she wanted to spend time with Yuria, so she declined most of them in order to hang out with her for at least one day. As soon as the girl heard this, she was pleasantly surprised. She was also very happy that her mother was now recovering and had more strength. Her mother suddenly sighed heavily and told Yuria that since they were going for a walk anyway, she suggested going into a sewing shop since she really loved looking at the different fabrics there. Of course, her daughter didn't object, so they immediately went there, and before the girl opened the door inside, she stopped and looked at her daughter. With a smile on her face, the Duchess said that she wanted to buy the most beautiful dress for Yuria because she, like no one else, deserved it. But Yuria did not object and said that it was simply a great idea because she really hadn't bought anything for herself for a long time and wouldn't be against new things. As soon as they entered, they were immediately greeted by two young ladies who greeted them. They said that they were incredibly happy to see them in their sewing shop. The Duchess immediately apologized for not warning them in advance of her visit, but explained that she would like to pick out a new dress for her daughter. The woman said that the dress she ordered was already ready, so she asked them to let her help her try it on. While the woman went to try on the dress, the shop owner turned to Yuria and offered her some tea while she looked at the different tailoring options for her dress. The girl did not refuse, and when she drank a cup of tea, she felt incredibly happy because she was in a beautiful place with her mother. Of course, such calm days were very pleasant for her, and she really hoped that they would never end, although she understood perfectly well that problems were perhaps just around the corner. She even thought that this evening was supposed to be promising, but at that moment she suddenly heard someone's familiar voice downstairs. And when Yuria listened more closely, she immediately recognized that this voice belonged to Marcel, her ex-fiancé. The man, seeing Yuri, immediately smiled and said that it was an incredible coincidence that they met in such a place. The girl immediately looked at him with hostility and asked what brought him to this place, and she even thought about the fact that this idiot decided to follow her. She also noticed an incredibly unpleasant smell coming from him and assumed that he had most likely been very drunk before coming to the boutique. Marcel suddenly said in a very serious voice that everyone around him was talking about him and the Duchess, and his whole life was going down the drain, while the girl at that time was living happily. Of course, this made him angry. He suddenly came closer to her, grabbed her hand, and started shouting, saying that it was because of her tricks that Lilica ran away. The girl was to blame for everything. As soon as the store owner and her assistant saw this, they immediately did not understand what to do, and also did not know how he could even allow himself such behavior. However, Yuria could stand up for herself. She looked at him with an angry look and told Marcel to calm down because he did not understand what she had to do with what happened between him and her sister. Of course, the man was very angry. He suddenly laughed and asked, "Did she really not understand what the relationship was?" He shouted again and asked, "Did she really think he didn't know it was all her doing?" She was the one who scared poor Lilica. Yuria immediately said in an icy voice that this was complete nonsense, and asked if perhaps Lilica was not interested in him only because he had no charisma. Therefore, the girl did not understand at all what relation she had to all this. Of course, Marcel was very angry when he heard this, because he thought that she would not contradict him. And then she spoke in such rude, in his opinion, phrases. Slowly drawing out each word in a very rough voice, he asked if she had really just said that. Because he was so angry, he began to press her hand much harder, and it was very painful. Yuria could not even move her hand, let alone remove it. The girl understood that at this rate he could even break her wrist, so she had to take some measures very urgently. She thought he was really pathetic, because she couldn't understand how she could have loved someone like him in that life. This man didn't deserve her love. An unrestrained and cruel man, of course. She should not even look in his direction, because it was very low. She needed help, and the knights remained outside, so she did not know how to shout to them. Then she finally couldn't take it anymore. She yelled at the worker in the sewing shop and told him not to just stand there and watch this, but to call for help. She knew that he was very drunk and therefore could not control himself. The maids immediately began running among themselves and talking about the need to call someone as soon as possible because they understood that this could end very badly. At that moment, a man with blonde hair grabbed his arm and told Marcel to stop because he had no right to do this. Marcel had already started to get indignant, but when he looked away, he immediately forgot. The man with blonde hair was the crown prince and said that he did not want to interfere in personal matters, but simply could not stand aside when lawlessness was happening. Yuria immediately bowed, greeting His Highness, and truly thanked him for helping her. The man also said that seeing Marcel blame others for his own mistakes, especially none other than his ex-fiancée, Lady Primrose, was surprising to him. And this situation made him think that he had simply lost his honor as a nobleman and a knight. For this reason, he considered the man no longer worthy of these titles, so he did not want to communicate with him respectfully anymore. Yuria didn't respond to this. She just stood there and watched what was happening in surprise, not understanding where the crown prince could have come from, and besides, he decided to help her again, and that was very nice. In fact, something similar had happened before and in her past life. She had once been at a banquet, where, of course, there were many different unpleasant rumors going around. The aristocrats talked about Marcel dancing with Lilica and believed that he would not have even agreed to an engagement with Yuria if she had not been from the Duke's family. They knew that she was the Duke's legitimate daughter, but they didn't think Yuria could offer more, so they believed that Lilica was simply the perfect choice for the man. They even thought that if he were engaged to this girl, it would all be much better, it would be the right option. Of course, Yuria heard all this and considered it very rude and impolite, but she had nothing to say. She herself really thought that all this was true. Even if she insisted on changes, they would not be sincere. And she would also be portrayed as a very stubborn girl who would spoil everyone's fun with her endless drama. So Yuria had no choice but to simply leave silently. But now in her new life, when she remembered all of this, she noticed one important detail. At that moment, the crown prince stood up for her and asked the people if they thought it was very strange that Lord Vieira would invite his fiancée's younger sister to dance. Since then, Yuria never crossed paths with him again, and until her death, she still remembered his words because it was very noble. Enoch said there were very few baseless accusations, and yet he raised his hand against a defenseless lady. The man looked at him with disgust and even wiped his hands after touching him, and also said that he was a disgrace to absolutely all men with such rude behavior. Marcel immediately began to tell His Highness that it was just a misunderstanding. This woman was using him, and he wanted to sort things out with her, but quickly fell silent. And all because the prince asked, did he really mean to say that Lady Primrose threatened him and forced him to persecute his own sister? The man immediately replied that this was not true at all. He had been deceived. He kept trying to prove that he had been deceived, but the prince was not going to listen to all this. Enoch said that he felt like he had proposed to the girl whose sister he was engaged to, and turning to Yuria, he asked, did he know the outcome of these events correctly? The girl was surprised because he spoke calmly, but at the same time quite firmly. Just like that time when he helped her, he was a noble man, and she liked it. She was about to say something when suddenly her mother ran out of the fitting room in her new dress and immediately shouted her name. She asked if she was okay, also looking closely at her hand, asked what was wrong with her wrist. She was very excited because she heard about what happened. She immediately wanted to jump on Marcel, asking what he was even allowing himself to do, but the guy turned around and started to leave. He said that he had almost forgotten that he had an appointment with the Count, so it was time for him to go. He said goodbye to His Highness. Of course, Yuria was not surprised that this man turned out to be an incredible coward. He ran away and did not even apologize to her for such rude behavior. Enoch, sighing heavily, said that this scoundrel was not worthy of her attention, so he said that it would be best for her to allow him to examine her wrist, since he was quite good at medicine. The girl did not object, and when the man examined her carefully, he said that it was very lucky that the bone was not broken. However, he also noticed that the skin was badly damaged and would have caused a severe bruise, which would have to be treated, otherwise it could get worse. But Yuria, smiling, replied that she should have been fine. It would have passed, and said that he shouldn't have worried so much. The man, of course, was amazed that after such a stressful situation, she was completely calm and did not even worry about what happened. Then the Duchess turned to him and, bowing, thanked him for standing up for her daughter. It was really very important to her, and she was very grateful to him. The man even felt a little awkward about it. He said that he was always happy to help and also to eliminate the lawlessness that was happening around him. He explained that he had gone to the tailors at Vivienne's request, and that he had never imagined that something like this could happen in that place. And he immediately asked the woman to sit back down, as it was very embarrassing to him. Then Yuria's mother replied that she had not seen Her Majesty for a long time, and said that she had heard that she was not feeling well. The man said that, unfortunately, this was indeed the case. She was not feeling well, so she could not often afford to go out in public. The woman sighed heavily and said that it was really very unfortunate because she was still so young, but she said that due to this, she could definitely recover soon. Enoch smiled and said that he really hoped that this would be true, and also added that he was waiting for her recovery so that they could spend more time together, just like Yuri with his mother. But Yuria didn't really know about it. She immediately looked at him with alarm and asked, was Princess Vivienne really in poor health? The Wall Prince was not very pleased with this conversation, but he said that it could not be said that she was seriously ill, but he very much hoped that what he was going to tell them would remain between them, and not a single living soul would know about it. And the prince told them that ever since the princess turned 10, the condition of her skin had begun to rapidly deteriorate, and for this reason she became very anxious, did not leave the palace at all, and refused to see anyone except the prince and a few of her personal maids. These women had been introduced to her since childhood, so she could only trust them. But of course, she really wanted to know what was fashionable at that time and what was being talked about in society, and the man was very sad because she could not see all this personally because of her embarrassment. So Enoch explained that he had gone to the tailor's. She was curious about what kind of dresses noble ladies were wearing at the time, and he was going to tell her all about it and maybe even buy her a gift. He also said that he really hoped that by telling her the latest news, he could interest her so that she would finally pluck up the courage to go outside her room. Enoch also explained that he had told them this for a reason. He had heard that the Duchess's skin had become much better recently. Even though she didn't use any cosmetics that contained lead, her skin had improved, so he really wished they could give him some advice. The man was truly desperate. He said he would be incredibly happy if they shared these secrets, because he wanted to make his sister happier. He also said that, of course, he would have repaid them for this help, because he simply did not know who to turn to. No one could cheer up or cure his sister. Yuria understood perfectly well that this man was not the kind to take advantage of the fact that he helped her, and did not try to pressure her with his status as a prince. He was simply a man in despair, who was ready to do anything to get out of the situation. Of course, in her opinion, this was quite unusual behavior for a person like him, so she was very interested in what it could be connected with. She turned to His Highness and said that the condition of her skin had improved only thanks to the cosmetics she had given her mother. Upon hearing this, the man was genuinely surprised and immediately asked if it was possible for the princess to also try something similar, because he believed that perhaps it could help. However, Yuria immediately asked for forgiveness and said that it was impossible. As soon as her mother heard this, she immediately began to be indignant. She already wanted to tell her daughter this, but did not have time. And all because the girl told the crown prince that each person had a completely different skin type. She also explained that there was no guarantee that these cosmetics would suit her and would not make the situation even worse. She explained that, of course, she could not offer her something like that for this very reason, since it all had to be selected individually in order not to make things even worse. Yuria also explained that due to improper use, there could be terrible side effects. The man hearing this was very upset. He, of course, thought that he could find a way, so hanging his head down, he just remained silent for a while, not knowing how to get out of this terrible situation. But then suddenly, after a short silence, the girl said that perhaps she should have met the princess in person. Enoch, upon hearing this, immediately asked, did she really mean that she had to personally come to the princess and see her in order to make a cream that would suit her skin type? Yuria immediately said that everything was exactly like that. She made the cosmetics for her mother herself, so she could repeat the same for the princess. Some time had passed since then. It was already completely dark outside, and the princess was in her wing, which was separated from everyone else. The maid who carried the tray of food in the evening understood why she had to take food to the princess's chambers. It was very strange for her. Getting to this place was quite a task, and then there would be the dishes to deal with. So the maid was very unhappy with this instruction, but she had no choice. When she reached the princess's room, she immediately knocked on the door and told the girl that she had brought her dinner. But when there was no answer, the maid immediately became worried. She even thought that perhaps she should go in and check if everything was okay there, because it was really very strange. She had heard that the princess was seriously ill, but she did not want to go in because she thought she might catch it too. So she just stood by the door and wondered what she should do. At that moment, another maid with blonde hair suddenly approached her and asked, was she really new? The maid who brought the food immediately said that everything was exactly like that. Then the lady explained to her that next time she should just leave the food at the door and knock, because the princess did not like it when her peace was disturbed. So entering there was strictly forbidden. Dahlia immediately went to the door, knocked on it, and told Her Highness that she was the only one in that place. So the princess did not need to worry. The princess allowed her to enter because she was the only servant she could trust completely. A few days ago, an invitation came from the crown prince while Yuria was in her palace. When her mother received the letter, she was immediately surprised and asked if they were sure there had been no mistake. The man who brought it said it was true. His Majesty had been expecting Lady Yuria Primrose. The girl who was sitting near the window was surprised that the prince decided not to put this matter off for too long and took action very quickly. When they met the crown prince a few days ago, and the girl explained that she made the cosmetics herself, he was immediately interested in it. Hearing this, the guy was very surprised and immediately told her not to think that he somehow doubted her abilities, but this was simply unusual in their time. Yuria immediately replied that she understood everything. It was hard to believe that an aristocrat of her status could do something like that herself. Until then, there were no cosmetics that could guarantee any results. They only slightly eliminated the problem, but never helped people. Indeed, if you walked around the market, you could hear so much. They told tales about some wonderful mixtures that you could make yourself. But of course, this only harmed the skin, and I had to powder even more to hide my imperfections after this terrible mixture. Yuria knew that her mother had poor health and that she could not use cosmetics, which could only worsen her condition. So the girl tried to develop her gift. She wanted to grow plants herself, from which she would make cosmetics for her mother, and now she finally succeeded. She didn't care whether they believed her or not. Of course, Yuria was going to ask the man not to tell people about this, since she did not want any extra popularity and attention to herself. However, suddenly the man turned to her and said that he would like to ask her for a favor and asked if she could meet his sister. Smiling, Enoch also said that it might take him some time to convince her to do so. So he asked the girl to be a little patient before she could come to them. Of course, Yuri was also curious about what her life would have been like if she had a brother like the crown prince, and not one like Jackson. But she was actually jealous of the princess. It even made her a little sad, because the woman didn't have such a fun life. When Yuria was ready and came down, the man who was supposed to accompany her immediately bowed and greeted her properly. He told her to sit down, and they were ready to leave as soon as the girl was ready. Just as Yuria was about to sit down, Lilica ran out into the street. She ran up to her and asked, "Was that really a carriage straight from the imperial castle?" And also asked what was going on, since she really didn't understand. Yuria was a little surprised by her sister's speed, but immediately replied that it just happened that way, and she didn't want to explain it all to her for long, since she already had to leave. Lilica got very angry and immediately started screaming, asking what happened and what the girl could have done since she was leaving. Because she never threw around such words, everyone immediately began to look at her in surprise, and Lilica immediately asked for forgiveness, saying that she had been too emotional that day. Of course, Yuria took this completely calmly, but she was a little irritated by the fact that the girl did not listen to her at all and therefore blew up a scandal out of thin air. So she turned to her sister, asking what she was talking about, and also said that she didn't understand at all. Lilica asked for forgiveness and said that she shouldn't misunderstand her. She was just very worried, because Yuria wasn't doing anything important, and she had absolutely no experience in that matter. And she said that maybe if it was about the Primrose family, she should have gone instead of Yuria. Of course, as soon as the girl heard this, she was shocked, as she didn't think that her stepsister would be able to show her true self so quickly. And when she thought about it, she realized that the imperial family never gave Lilic peace. She was especially interested in the crown prince. Enoch was her ideal. She was ready to do anything just to get to the ball where this prince would be present, to at least somehow show herself in front of him. So now, when the girl said such words, Yuria immediately understood what she was thinking about. But Lilica explained this by saying that her engagement had fallen through quite recently, and she believed that it was best for the girl not to attract unnecessary attention to herself. And so Lilica said that she thought that she should have gone instead of the girl. As soon as the escort from the imperial palace heard this, he was astonished. He did not understand how such a thing could be said. Yuria suddenly smiled slyly and immediately asked, did she really want to go instead of the person who was summoned by the crown prince himself? She wondered if this girl was so nervous, or if she was just completely out of control and had already decided not to hide her intentions. But Lilica said with a smile on her face that she was ready to be there in a minute. But then Yuri's escort suddenly spoke up. He said that His Majesty, the Crown Prince, wanted to see Lady Yuria specifically, so there was no longer any time to delay, otherwise they would be late, and that was not very good. As soon as Lilica heard such a rude refusal, she was shocked. Her gaze suddenly became incredibly angry and she asked, "Is that really so?" The man was a little worried because he didn't understand why she had such a reaction, but he said that everything was exactly like that. He didn't want to lead anyone else except Yuria. But Lilica immediately asked for forgiveness, saying that she really had behaved inappropriately. She was just worried about her dear sister, and that was why she had crossed such boundaries of what was permitted. After that, her face suddenly became very happy, and fixing her hair, she told her sister to have a good time because she deserved it. But Yuria understood perfectly well what exactly was hidden behind this joyful smile from the girl, since she acted the same way as Lilica had acted with her in her past life. So she thanked her sister for sharing everything with her, and Lilica replied that she was glad that she understood her feelings. But Yuria, accompanied by this man, went to the carriage and said that she knew very well that people were talking a lot. And going inside, she said that, of course, Lilica did not want this, but evil tongues were whispering that it was she who seduced her fiancé. Yuri was now interested in what it was like for the girl when everything inside her was clenched with despair. But before she got into the carriage, she asked her sister if she had forgotten her mother's words that instead of worrying about her, Lilica should think about how to explain that she and Marcel had dressed as if they were a couple. She also thought that the girl had to try hard, since a bad excuse would look strange. But Lilica, hearing this, was in a stupor, since she did not expect such nastiness from her. But before getting into the carriage, Yuria, smiling, looked at her sister again and said that she only wanted the best, because after all, she was her sister. After that, she got inside and drove away, and Lilica stood in the yard for a while and was amazed by what her sister told her. The girl suspected from the very beginning that something was wrong, and now she was finally convinced that it really was Yuria. It was all her doing, that Marcel came in the same color as Lilica. Of course, Lilica was incredibly angry about this and wanted to take revenge on her sister, because she understood that this was bound to happen sooner or later. Quite a lot of time had passed since then, but Yuria finally arrived at the estate. The attendant immediately helped Yuria out of the carriage and said that they had arrived and that the prince was already waiting for her. Upon arrival at the imperial palace, they actually had to walk for quite a long time to reach the princess's residence, as it was located much further from the main entrance. Despite the fact that Yuria herself suggested that they meet, she was still very worried, since this was an unusual meeting. As soon as she began to approach the princess's estate, accompanied by two knights, a servant met her there and said that they were expecting her. Dahlia gave her name and said that she was Her Majesty's personal servant, and also explained that she was going to accompany her, so she asked the girl to follow her. Yuria, of course, was a little surprised, but she did not object and immediately followed the maid. They had to walk quite a long distance, and after some time they finally reached the princess's chambers. As soon as they reached the door, the maid first knocked and told Her Majesty that it was she, also explaining that she had brought the Lady Primrose to her. A thin voice was heard from there, which allowed them to enter, so they immediately went inside, and the maid soon left the ladies alone. Yuria, as soon as she entered, told the princess that it was a great honor to meet her, and also explained that she was from the Duke's house. However, the princess was not as friendly as she might seem at first glance. She asked them to leave all these formalities aside and said that the girl could sit down. Yuria went to the window and sat down next to her. They were brought tea, and for a while the girls did not talk about anything, because no one knew how to break this awkward silence. Yuria decided to take matters into her own hands and, smiling happily, said that the tea was very tasty and asked what kind she usually liked to drink. The princess did not respond to this for some time, and in general she turned away from her and did not want to make contact. Yuria, of course, pretended not to notice this, but she herself understood that at this rate she would go crazy, since they sat in such awkward silence for a long time. She knew she needed to somehow get the princess talking before asking her about her skin, but the girl was silent, and it was impossible to start a basic conversation with her. The princess herself considered Yuria to be rather sad and did not understand why her brother had brought her to her at all. The girl heard what was said about this girl. She was hot-tempered, rude, stupid, She was nothing but trouble, so she did not even understand what kind of aristocrat this lady could be. And yet the princess still agreed to meet her, because she had heard all these rumors about Her Majesty's terrible skin, which magically, very quickly, became simply amazing. She also heard conversations from other ladies who said that if they had skin like the princess, they too would not want to live and would not go out into society. And yet they admired the dignity with which the princess bore it. And Lilica, when she was still very little, said that in her place she would never have left the house at all, because she would have been so embarrassed that she would have locked herself in there forever. Of course, the girl understood perfectly well that no one would dare to say all this to her face. It was just chatter. But she did not understand why she had to endure all this. Of course, she was very sad, because she did not choose this fate. And anyway, these people could not know anything about all this. She hated it all. The girl also believed that if she had to live like this, she would have been better off ending this life much earlier than the time allotted to her. But in fact, that day, Yuria stood up for her. She turned to her sister and asked how she could even say such a thing and who she thought she was. In fact, it was only this girl who stood up for her, and so she was incredibly pleased about it. The brother also told the princess that she could be relied upon, so she agreed to this meeting. Soon the girl finally imagined a dialogue and asked how Yuria met the prince. Taking off her gloves, the girl explained that she had gotten into a very unpleasant situation that day, and His Highness had come to her aid. She also said that her ex-fiancé showed up at the sewing shop and started threatening her. His Highness stood up for her and got rid of this inadequate guy. Yuria also showed the bruises that remained on her arm, and as soon as the princess saw this, she was really very shocked. She immediately jumped up and asked the girl what it was all about, and Yuri, smiling as if it was no big deal, replied that if it weren't for the prince, he would have even broken her arm. Then the princess screamed loudly and said that Marcel Vieira was truly the most disgusting person that could ever exist. After that, she took the girl by the hand and said that if she were in her place, she probably wouldn't be able to endure all of this, and also asked Yuria how she could even think about marrying such a terrible guy like him. Yuria was genuinely amazed by the attitude that the princess showed towards her. She was very caring and genuinely worried about the girl. But then suddenly the princess realized that she had crossed the line a little, so sitting back down, she said that she had said too much and asked for forgiveness. The girl also said that, of course, she didn't know what kind of person he was when he proposed, so she shouldn't have asked such questions and meddle in other people's business. But now Yuria noticed that she was a very ordinary girl who was also emotional and wanted to communicate with everyone, and she was really very glad that the ice had moved at least a little. Then she decided to speak directly to the point and told Her Highness that perhaps the prince had already told her that everyone has different types of skin. Therefore, it was necessary to select products that would suit her, and it was for this reason that Yuria came to her personally. The girl also said that if she didn't mind, she would like to look at her face to understand how she should proceed. Of course, the princess had her doubts. However, when she saw Yuria's joyful smile, and when the girl said that it wouldn't take much time, she seriously thought about it. But she still couldn't understand why Yuri needed to look at that disgusting face like hers. She was silent for a while, but then asked if she had understood correctly that if the girl had seen her face, she would have been able to help. But she didn't understand how this was even possible, because she wasn't a doctor or a priest. As soon as Yuria heard this, she immediately realized that she had spoken harshly, which meant that this was her defensive reaction. To her, she was just a stranger, who, of course, was best not to trust at all, but since she had agreed to meet her, it meant that she was ready to cling to even the ghost of a hope of healing her skin. She was silent for a while, but then the girl agreed, saying that she really was neither a doctor nor a priest, and perhaps her mother was just lucky. She also said that there was a chance that these cosmetics would not suit her and there would be no result, but the girl came closer to her and said that she came to help her. Yuria took her hand and said that she could not guarantee her a result, but she was going to do everything in her power to give her at least some hope. The princess was really amazed and told the girl about it. She said that she couldn't promise her anything and she had no confidence, and yet she had come all this way to come to her. The girl was silent for a while, but then she took her hand in return and said that she still trusted her because people had promised to help her so many times, but it all turned out to be a lie. She suddenly stood up from her seat and took her hands away from the girl. She said formally, "Yuria Primrose, that she trusted her and began to remove the cloak from her face to show it to her. In fact, the princess's condition turned out to be much worse than the girl could have expected, and this, of course, upset her. She immediately, upon seeing the girl's skin, asked the princess if she had undergone any treatment by chance. The princess replied that His Highness had invited the priest to help her, but the relief was temporary. Nothing could completely cure her, and for this reason she was upset. Even saints and mages couldn't achieve the full result, so she didn't have much hope for Lady Primrose. Those who were supposed to help the sick spent their holy powers on her, and it didn't even help. And even if she had been cured, her reputation had been completely destroyed, so the princess could not show herself to the people of the empire. She was content with the life she had and had already gotten used to being alone. That's why she asked Yuria, if anything happened, not to try too hard and not to get upset if something didn't work out. In fact, the girl came to that place only to repay the crown prince for his great help that he gave her when he saved her. But now she just wanted to help this poor girl who was left alone with the most terrible life, regardless of whether she owed anyone anything or not. So, when Yuria stood up, she curtsied and said that she had finished her examination, and also thanked the princess for her patience. The girl immediately put the cape back on her head and did not understand what kind of patience there could be, because it was much more difficult to look at her face. After some time, the two of them walked down the corridor since they had already spent enough time together and were ready to go their separate ways. Yuria thought that the best thing, of course, would be to use lavender and aloe for the girl's cream. Lavender was very easy to find, but the second would be a problem. But she absolutely had to find aloe to soothe her skin, which meant figuring out where to source the ingredients and where they could be grown in normal conditions. As they were walking, the princess suddenly stopped and, turning to Lyda, said that she could use her garden at the palace if she needed anything. The girl also explained that few people had been there, so no one would have bothered her while she worked on her cosmetics, and if she needed anything, she just had to tell her, and she would have been able to get it. Of course, as soon as Yuria heard this, she immediately felt uncomfortable, because she did not expect such kindness and generosity, and said that it was not necessary at all. But the princess replied that she had heard that she used plants blessed by her family to create cosmetics. She also said that the girl had tried incredibly hard for her, so this was the least she could do to help her. She already wanted to object, but the princess said that it was an order, so Yuria simply sighed heavily and said that she obeyed her. She also said that she had already said that she could not guarantee complete results, but she was ready to assure the girl that her cosmetics were better than some dubious powder made from monster bones that were sold everywhere. And even if the girl was unhappy with her cosmetics, she would really like the princess to not use such things anymore, since they only worsened the situation with her health and skin. But the princess replied that she had known for quite some time that they were useless, so she should not say it again. She also asked why the girl hid the fact that she was involved in cosmetics. After all, she could have achieved success in this field and become a very successful lady. But Yuria replied that she did not have the best reputation, and if it became known that the princess had turned to her, then her reputation would also suffer even more from this. As soon as the princess heard this, she felt incredibly ashamed, since she herself had initially judged the girl based on the bad rumors she had heard from everywhere. Even though she had helped her when she was younger, the princess still believed these rumors, so she suddenly turned to Yuria and advised her to be more confident in herself. And she also had absolutely no reason to worry about the girl's reputation. Yuria was about to object, but she didn't even have time to say a word, because another person appeared before their eyes. And as soon as they looked to the side, they saw that it was Enoch, the princess's brother. He smiled, immediately rejoiced to have met them, and asked how they had talked at all. She was a little surprised when she saw her brother, but immediately said that he had not mentioned that he was supposed to come, and because of this, she was very wary. Meanwhile, Yuria made a curtsy and greeted His Highness, saying that she was very glad to see him. Enoch immediately apologized to the girl for leaving her so quickly last time, although he himself invited her to the palace. He really felt awkward about this situation, but he had to leave immediately. And besides, the man turned to his sister Vivian and said that he saw that she had already become close to Lady Primrose, and this surprised him. He explained that it was the first time he had seen her talk for so long to someone other than her personal maid. But it was not a bad thing at all. He was very happy for her. Vivian, of course, was very indignant when she heard this phrase, and immediately began to shout at him, asking what he had said at all. And Yuria felt awkward because she was present while they were arguing. The princess was ready to hit him and asked him to leave, but the man didn't care. He liked to tease her like that. Of course, the girl, observing that they had a good relationship, immediately understood that it was just wonderful. And as soon as she was about to intervene in the conversation, the man looked at her and asked if she had already left. Yuria was a little surprised, but immediately said that everything was correct. Then Enoch asked her to allow him to accompany her to the crew. Some time had passed since then, and Yuria had already begun to leave, while Vivian's brother had returned to her in the meantime to talk again. As soon as the man entered the room and saw his sister standing near the window, he immediately said that he could not believe that she had actually been talking to someone for so long. He also asked what the princess thought about this girl in general, because he was really interested in knowing her opinion. The girl immediately replied that Yuria was not like other noble ladies, and this was not as bad as it might seem at first. The man immediately smiled and said that he hadn't heard that from her for a long time, and also asked why she thought so. Vivian looked at her and said that she did not feel sorry for her. Never this time. Then she asked what the man himself thought about it and whether he agreed with her. For a moment, Enoch doubted. In fact, he remembered very well how Yuria had smiled at him as a child, and it had been such a warm smile, like rays of sunshine. It had warmed him up immediately. Well, of course, it was difficult to do something like that after so many years and only one meeting, so he simply told his sister that he had nothing to say. Vivian suddenly smiled and said that he was very boring, so she was going to leave him, since it was impossible to start any dialogue with him. Just as she was about to walk out the door, the man suddenly stood up and asked if she had completed all her duties for the day since she was about to leave. And Vivian replied that she needed to prepare what she had promised for Yuria, so those matters had to wait for a while. She turned to her maid and asked if she had taken the list that Lady Primrose had left her. When the maid said yes, the girl asked her to contact the largest guild of merchants who did their work quickly and order absolutely everything that was on the list. The maid immediately bowed and said that everything would be done. After that, they went out the door, and the princess's brother heard nothing more. For a while, he just sat and smiled, looking out the window, and all the time thinking about Yuri. He really hoped that he had not managed to reveal all his cards. Several days passed since then, and Yuria trained very often to be able to do what she had planned, and after a lot of training, she finally succeeded. In fact, not all the plants took root in the princess's garden, so she had to rely on blessings too often. Yuria used a lot of her power and therefore fainted quite often and had nosebleeds due to her exerting too much effort. Of course, the blessing had its limits, and Yuria could not produce cosmetics on a large scale, as it would simply burn out. When the girl was sitting in the room, she began to worry a little, since the messenger should have come to her a long time ago, but he still hadn't arrived. But as soon as this thought flashed through her mind, someone immediately started knocking very loudly on her room door. She was very surprised and panicked, not knowing what could have happened. After a while, the door to her room opened, and her brother walked in. He looked at her angrily and asked in a cold voice if she ever thought about anything she did. He started yelling at her again, asking what the girl was up to and why she was in the emperor's palace. He had only recently heard these rumors. He also asked if she suddenly decided to dream of becoming a crown princess. Yuria didn't respond to this, but as she watched all this, she realized that it sounded very familiar to her. Even without seeing his face, she knew perfectly well who could say these words, her so-called relative, but he too was not her real family. The man looked at her and asked if His Highness had really invited her, or if she had made it all up and simply showed up there. He was about to say something else when the butler suddenly entered the room. He apologized for interrupting them, but said that Lady Primrose was already expecting Her Highness. As soon as Jackson heard this, he was shocked. He immediately looked at the butler and asked, "Did Princess Vivian personally call her? And I even showed up at this estate?" Yuria, getting up from her seat, looked at her brother with a very angry look and said that if he had nothing more to say, then she would like him to move away and not bother her. The girl explained that under no circumstances could Her Highness be kept waiting, so she could not be late for this meeting. Jackson was about to ask how she did it, but the girl with a smile on her face replied that she had explained the flood to him, if he was really that interested. After that, she apologized and said that she was very busy, so she could not waste any more time on this empty talk. Of course, Yuria was a little sad that she had made the princess wait because of her brother, and whenever he showed up, he always made things worse. The girl knew that she had better hurry, and as soon as she entered the room, she suddenly heard the angry voice of the princess, who was asking someone whether this person knew how to behave appropriately. Vivian also said that she came to see Yuria and did not understand why Lilica was bothering her with her meaningless chatter. The girl was also irritated by the fact that every time she asked to call Yuria, the girl ignored her, and she could not believe that Lilica really thought that she could ignore her words. The princess also said that she didn't care about her at all, and at that moment Yuria herself entered the room and apologized for being late. As soon as Lilica heard this voice, she immediately understood who it was, since she could already memorize it perfectly, and turning her head to the side, she really saw her sister. The girl did not understand why she suddenly came at that very moment, as if she felt that she was there. Yuria, meanwhile, sighing heavily, said that her younger sister had certainly behaved unwisely, and it was her fault that she had not been able to keep a better eye on her. So the girl asked the princess for forgiveness. And Lilica, hearing this, was very surprised, because she had never been called unreasonable and ill-mannered. However, the worst thing for her was the fact that she said these words right in front of the princess, but the girl, looking at her younger sister, said that for Yuri's sake, she was ready to close her eyes to it. After this, the girls began to leave in order to be alone and talk about their affairs, which is what they should be doing. And Lilica, who was left standing completely alone, did not understand how her sister had managed to win the favor of the princess herself, because this had never happened before. She also thought that if she had the ability to heal, she could have cured the princess and become her confidant instead of her sister. Of course, she was sad that this was not the case. Soon, when Yuria and the princess came to the living room, the girl immediately gave her new products and asked, "Was it really new cosmetics?" The girl replied that this was not the case at all. It was the same cream, but this time she added some fragrance to it and handed her a small tube of cream. Yuria explained that she was simply showing that the princess would like the scent of flowers instead of simple medicinal scents. It would be much more pleasant to apply to her skin. As soon as the princess heard this, she immediately felt pleased. She said that the girl was very attentive to her, and she appreciated it. However, Yuria also said that if she didn't like the scent, she could come up with something else to make sure everything was perfect. But the girl immediately said that it was quite enough, and she was grateful for her attention. But she also added that she came to her not only for the cosmetics. Yuria was a little surprised and immediately asked, "Then why?" And the princess began to take off her cloak and said that she was still not completely cured, so she could not go anywhere without her veil. But she was still very grateful to the girl and wanted to thank her face to face. As soon as she took off this cape, Yuria was incredibly surprised. The princess also said, a little embarrassed, that she would like to call her by her first name, since she and her sister have the same last name. So this could lead to a big misunderstanding. Vivian also said that she would like to see her not only for cosmetics or skincare, and asked if the girl would be against it. As soon as Yuria heard this, she was genuinely surprised. But she immediately said that, of course, she would not be against it. If the girl wanted it, then she certainly agreed. She also said that she also really enjoyed talking to her, so she was all for such an initiative. Vivian was very happy and said that she was very pleased to hear that. She felt that they could become very good and close friends, as they had quite a lot in common and they had a good start. She also said that during this time she had already forgotten what it was like to have someone nearby with whom she could simply talk, and who would not judge her for her skin problems. Yuria at that moment thought about the fact that she had never really had a friend either, so she said that it was the greatest honor for her. Vivian also said that she was looking forward to their next meetings, as it was just wonderful. After that, they were brought tea, and they began to discuss some moments from life. And as soon as the princess heard that Yuria would like to engage in the cosmetics trade, she was a little surprised. But she really thought that there must be other people besides the princess and her mother who could benefit greatly from these cosmetics and perhaps even make their lives easier, so she wanted to do it. And besides, when Yuria created cosmetics for Her Highness, she discovered that the cream could even help heal wounds. In the Empire, even the most minor wounds could only be treated by priests. However, of course, not everyone could afford such services, so the cream could be of great help to those who could not turn to a priest. After some thought, Vivian finally agreed and said that what the girl was doing should have greatly helped many people. And after that, she asked if Yuria would like to discuss this issue with the Crown Prince. As soon as the girl heard this, she was surprised and immediately asked what it was for. The girl explained that she said this not because they were related, but simply because he knew a lot about trading and could give some advice. She also asked you to give her some time so that she could arrange a meeting for them. The girl really thought that it would be very useful. And so several days passed from that moment. Yuria went directly to meet the crown prince and doubted whether he would be interested in listening to her business plan. She knew that if he was interested, then having members of the imperial family as business partners could bring many advantages for her, and perhaps she would not even have to think about financing. And besides, she wouldn't necessarily have to sell cosmetics in her own name, which would be very helpful in solving the problems with her reputation in society. As soon as she had already approached the door and opened it, she immediately became a little worried. As soon as she went inside, she was very surprised because her father was already waiting for her there. He, seeing his daughter, immediately smiled happily and asked, "Was it really true that Princess Vivian visited the Primrose estate in order to see her?" He also asked if it was true that she wanted to thank her personally for what the girl had done. At that moment, the butler who was standing behind spoke up and said that it was indeed so. He also said that Princess Vivian had great respect for Lady Yuria, and that was the reason why she treated their communication that way. The Duke said that this surprised him very much, since even he had not seen the princess for several years, despite his rather high status. Of course, Yuria understood perfectly well that her father was interested in this whole situation only because he saw it as an opportunity for himself, and this irritated her very much. And when her father asked what had happened, Yuria turned away from him and said that she could not tell him anything since she and the princess had agreed to keep it between themselves. But the man hearing this said that in that case it must have been something very important, since it had to be kept secret. He also said that of course this meant that they had to be very careful. But then suddenly Yuria found the perfect moment to set up her sister and said that they were almost prevented from meeting as soon as the princess arrived at the estate. She decided to prepare her own trap for Lilica, so she said that the princess was furious, and her father, upon hearing this, immediately asked why this happened. But at that moment the butler spoke up, turning to the Duke, and said that he could explain everything. The man was already starting to get a little wary. He understood that the princess's anger was not the best thing, so he wanted to know as soon as possible what had happened. And then the devoted butler Yuri told about the mistakes of Lilica and Jackson, and as soon as the father heard this, he was simply horrified. He slammed his fist on the table and immediately shouted to the entire estate, telling them to call Jackson and Lilica immediately. Because of how angry he was, his face turned red, and of course the butler immediately went to tell the maids to bring the heirs. In the end, Jackson and Lilica were indeed called into their father's office, and then he yelled at them very loudly. The man did not stand on ceremony. He said that they did not even try to show due respect to the princess for the sake of preserving the honor of their family, and this depressed him. Jackson tried to defend himself and said that he was simply afraid that Yuria might be rude to Her Highness. However, the man did not want to hear all this. He wondered if he really got involved in this matter instead of sorting it out after the princess had left. He also asked, what if she had simply gone back to the palace without seeing Yuria? That would have been a scandal. He told the children to apologize to their sister, and if anything happened, the responsibility would of course fall on her fragile shoulders, so they were very guilty towards her. Of course, the guy and the girl, turning away very quietly but still asked for forgiveness, saying that they should not have done that. Yuri was not at all happy with the fact that they apologized to her with very dissatisfied faces, but the sight was still quite pleasant. She supposed it must be incredibly humiliating for them to bow their heads to her for the first time, since all this time they had always just contradicted her and done everything out of spite, but now they were to blame. But she decided that she no longer needed to be distracted by all these secondary factors, since she had a rather important day ahead, and she still had a meeting with the prince ahead. And when she came to the living room, Enoch immediately met her there. He greeted the girl and said that he was very glad that she agreed to this. He didn't want to waste time and asked if she was ready to start discussing her idea of selling cosmetics. After some time, Yuria introduced everything to him, and after that, the man offered her one solution to the problem and also asked at the end what she thought about his proposal. The girl thought about this seriously and then said that before she answered, she would also like to say something in turn. Of course, Enoch did not object, and then the girl replied that if he was only interested in the cosmetics trade and wanted to repay her for helping Her Highness, then in that case she did not need his help. The man was genuinely surprised when he heard this and immediately asked her to let him explain. The prince said that her help to Vivian had nothing to do with this. He was really very interested in her proposal, and he wanted to help her idea. And even if she had to sell only cosmetics, it was already a good start. But the fact that her creams could be used for medicinal purposes gave her idea more possibilities. And given how things were going in the empire, as she herself had already said, her business had significant potential, so he would have considered it a crime to give up on this idea. He also said that the girl mentioned that the formula of each cream should be selected individually, which intrigued him especially since it was truly unique. He said he would like her to explain this need in more detail. He was really interested. Yuria was, of course, a little surprised, but after some silence she said that he had an excellent question, so she would be happy to explain everything to him. Quite a lot of time had passed since then, and they were still together, since the girl had only recently finished telling about her thoughts. Enoch said he thought it would be best to entrust the management of the company and the development of production to different people, which would be much more practical and convenient, in his opinion. Yuria agreed with him and said that these are very different areas of business management, and they could also indicate the ingredients on the packaging, and for some time even give out samples for free in order to attract as many people as possible. The man, upon hearing about the samples, was immediately very surprised and asked, was she really ready to do this? The girl replied that this was exactly the case. A small number of products would allow people to decide whether the product was right for them before buying it. They would not be fooled, but perhaps the products would sell out faster. The man thought for a moment and immediately said that it was indeed a great idea. Distributing products in densely populated areas could attract even those who were not interested in cosmetics. So, smiling happily, he said that it was just great and wanted to talk about her business again, but the girl suddenly interrupted him. She put the papers on the table and asked, "Didn't he tell me that he was interested in the business itself, not only because of Her Highness?" The man turned away and immediately said that everything was exactly like that, and asked what the problem was then, because he did not understand why she suddenly interrupted him. Yuria replied that in that case, she would like him to explain why it was advantageous for her to do business with him and not with someone else. The man, hearing about this, immediately smiled, because this is exactly what he wanted. The girl explained her position by the fact that he was her potential investor, and she had already explained her entire development strategy to him, but she was not supposed to cooperate with him. And it is for this reason that she would like to know why she should have chosen him if she suddenly had other investors who would also be interested in her business and would be ready to invest money in it. Of course, it was her cosmetics and her idea, so she had every right to choose. Of course, it wasn't that she didn't trust him, but she had to do it. Of course, the support of a member of the imperial family was very important, and it cannot be overestimated in the matter of the struggle to realize it. And besides, Lilica was soon to become a saint. But during negotiations, it was necessary to behave very confidently, and it was for this reason that the girl decided to start this conversation, to show that she was very serious. However, Enoch suddenly laughed very loudly, and when he finally calmed down, he said that it was a very good question. The girl even became wary because she thought that he was not taking it seriously. But the man replied that, firstly, he wanted to explain to her the work of the trade guild, which was subordinate to members of the imperial family. After much explanation, discussion, and negotiation, they finally came to a mutually beneficial agreement, which both parties signed and were very happy with. All investments in her business had to be made exclusively under the name of the Crown Prince, and she did not mind even this condition, since she herself insisted on it. When it was finally all over, Yuria shook his hand and said she had been looking forward to working with her investor. And the man, smiling happily, said that everything was mutual. It was also the girl who said that she would like to keep it all a secret for at least some time. Hearing this, the prince was very surprised and immediately asked why she decided to make such a strong-willed decision. And Yuria replied that if everyone found out that she was in charge, then of course it wouldn't help her business in any way, so she wanted to keep everything a secret. But the man said that if she had succeeded, it would have significantly, on the contrary, increased her reputation. The girl agreed that this was also a possible option, but the risk was still too high. She sighed heavily and said that at that point, it was no longer just her business, so it was best to reduce the chances of something going wrong. The man was sincerely shocked. He was irritated by such injustice, since the girl deserved to bear the name of the administrator of this company. But she could not do this because of the whole society, which would immediately begin to discuss and condemn her. But keeping his anger in himself, he said that he didn't mind keeping it a secret for a while because he trusted her, so he didn't think that she could set him up like that. He also said that perhaps she didn't know, but earning his and Vivian's trust wasn't that easy. But somehow the girl managed to do it. Yuria immediately thanked him for his trust and then began to run away because she felt uncomfortable, and the man, laughing, said that he was surprised by the fact that she thanked him all the time. She didn't understand what else she could say in her situation when the crown prince gave her some kind of compliment. Not to say that she already knew it or something like that. That would be very impolite. But she was very happy that the contract was successfully concluded, so it was time for her to return home. And just as the girl was about to leave, the man suddenly came closer to her and, putting his arm around her waist, began to remove something from her hair. Yuria was incredibly surprised. She didn't understand when he managed to get so close to her, and the man, smiling happily again, said that there was a speck of dust in her hair, and he removed it. The girl didn't understand what he had done at all, and most importantly, why. She turned away from him, even blushed a little, and said that he could have just told her about it. She would have cleaned it up herself. She herself wondered whether the crown prince had always been so attentive and even caring. Yes, when she looked at him again, she saw that he had started smiling again, and she didn't understand how it was possible to be such a positive person that he could constantly have a smile on his face. She, indignantly, also said that he should not have done the same to other noble ladies, because they could have misunderstood him. She decided to give him this advice for his own good. The man, beginning to smile again, said that she was indeed right, and replied that next time he would definitely be more careful. But Yura still didn't understand why he continued to smile, and even wondered whether the future emperor should be so frivolous in such moments. But then she realized that joy in life is a very good character trait. It made it much easier to cope with difficulties. The man, meanwhile, offered her another cup of tea so that she wouldn't leave so early, and Yuria didn't refuse, since she was in no hurry to go home. She was very sad that, unlike the crown prince, she was unable to maintain a positive and cheerful attitude. In such situations, she simply lacked such endurance. In fact, Enoch's story was unknown even to Yuria, but when he was a child, their carriage had an accident, and the boy experienced a terrible loss. Right in front of his eyes, his dear mother died, and he had to cope with all of this alone, even considering the fact that he was also very seriously injured after this accident. When he was a child, his parents fought quite often, and every time this happened, his mother would go to her parents' place to calm down and catch her breath. That day, even Vivian begged her mother to take her along, and she and her brother ended up going there together. However, the carriage overturned on the way through the forest, and everyone except the guy and Vivian died right before their eyes. The boy didn't even have time to properly grieve before their father began to blame him for what happened. He really did say that it was his fault. He believed that if the boy hadn't forced his mother and himself and his sister to go together, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. He really blamed the little boy for just going with his mother. Enoch couldn't believe it, and he kept yelling at him for a long time. And for quite a long time, he blamed the boy for the death. However, very soon the terrible truth emerged that the father wanted to make his mistress, not his wife, empress. So he killed the children's mother. And when this became known, the grandfather was beside himself with rage. He abandoned his son because he considered it a very low act on his part. He made sure that the throne went to his grandson, even though Enoch was too young to be a ruler. He decided to exile his son, who was also a scoundrel who killed his own wife, to the outskirts of the empire for the rest of his life. Of course, the boy couldn't believe that his own father had done this. He said that he was his son and couldn't do this. But soon the guards simply took him out and the scream stopped. Then Grandpa Echo turned to the boy and said that he had always been a very smart boy, so he really believed that he could handle the responsibilities of the crown prince. It wasn't praise. He had placed absolutely all his expectations on his shoulders, and therefore the boy, having no experience, had to somehow justify them. He hoped that the boy would not become like his father, and so Enoch had a very hard time. Years passed since then, and his father returned to the capital already in a coffin. People said that he had suddenly fallen ill, but they did not understand how this was even possible, because he had always had very good and strong health. They also decided that the rumors were true, that his own father had decided to simply get rid of him because he was a burden. For many years, Enoch sincerely hated his father, considering him a murderer who decided to get rid of his wife and children. But one day the boy thought about the fact that perhaps those rumors were not really true, but fiction, and then his heart began to beat even faster because he felt the danger that came from his grandfather. The guy suddenly started coughing. His assistant, who was always nearby, immediately asked if he was feeling unwell. But Enoch simply turned around and started to walk away, saying he needed some fresh air. Of course, his assistant was very surprised since the funeral was about to begin any minute, but he couldn't stop him. The boy just ran out into the street. Of course, he was very scared because he didn't know how long he could remain the perfect grandson and how long he could live up to his grandfather's expectations as the crown prince. He even thought that if he ever disappointed him, he might get rid of him too, since he was unable to cope with his responsibilities. And so, when the guy was running away from the funeral, Yuria, who was also on her way to it, suddenly ran out to meet him. He was very surprised to see the girl. Yes, Yuria herself did not expect to meet him. She immediately asked, "Did something really happen?" Since it was believed that he should be inside and say goodbye to his father. The guy meanwhile began to carefully examine her red eyes and silver hair, and also asked, "Is it true that you are Yuria Primrose?" The girl, of course, was very surprised that he recognized her. But breathing a sigh of relief, she also said that he scared her, because she thought that a monster ran out of the shadows. The guy sighed heavily and said that he really was a monster. Yuria was shocked by what he was saying and immediately decided to explain herself. The girl replied that she didn't mean that he was a monster. She just thought that someone wanted to attack her. She just didn't see him. That's all. But the guy said in a very sad voice that she might be right. When he saw her surprised expression, he immediately said that she probably didn't know, but his father was a monster. He also explained that he was his son, which meant that he too automatically became a monster since he was his heir. Yuria was shocked. She immediately asked, did he really think that way just because of his brother? The guy didn't want to, but he didn't answer. He just turned away and was silent. The girl understood perfectly well that she needed to somehow dispel this tense atmosphere, and immediately said that this meant in this case that he also considered Princess Vivian a monster. As soon as the guy heard the suggestion, he immediately looked at her in surprise and asked what she was saying. Yuria calmly explained that they were, after all, brother and sister, and asked if he thought that the princess in that case would also have to be a monster. But Enoch really didn't understand how his most beautiful sister could be a monster. Yuria, in turn, replied that in that case, he wasn't a monster either. She immediately asked why he suddenly began to think differently about himself, just because of some people around him. The guy was genuinely surprised. He understood that if his father was a monster, then by his logic he was the same. But Vivian, he never thought about her like that at all. His dear little sister was incredibly beautiful and very dear to him. That's why he realized in that accident that he had to protect her at any cost. He didn't understand how he could consider her a monster in that case. But according to Yuri's logic, in that case, he wasn't a monster either. Yuri asked why he said things about himself that he would never say about his sister. She asked, couldn't he be as kind to himself as he was to his sister? The boy had no answer at that point, because he really didn't know what to do. No one had ever said such words to him before. Everyone around him pitied him and said that it was very sad that he lost his parents at an early age and also became the crown prince. And there were many terrible rumors about him. Everyone pitied him, others praised him, but no one ever thought about what he himself felt at that moment when he stood before people in public. But Yuria suddenly said that she understood very little at all, because she was still little, so she asked him not to take her words seriously at all. Of course, Enoch was surprised that on that day, the girl he saw for the first time told him what he needed to hear. So he smiled, thanked her, and said that she was absolutely right. So he was very grateful to her and said that he would definitely remember her words forever, because they were the ones that gave him the motivation to move on. Then plucking up his courage, he returned to the funeral and immediately found his grandfather to have a serious talk with him. Of course, his grandfather immediately looked angrily at the guy and asked how he dared to run away from such an important event and wanted to scold him. The guy apologized but said that he felt very dizzy and also said that, of course, something like this would never happen again. After that, he told his grandfather that he was going to become just a great emperor and even surpass him. As soon as the grandfather heard this, he immediately laughed. patted the boy on the shoulder, and said that he was very wayward, but he even liked it. But he said that the boy did everything right, because that's what his grandson should be like. He should strive for the best and not get stuck in one place. Enoch truly did not intend to be afraid ever again. He did not intend to be like his father or his grandfather. During his training, whenever he began to doubt, he immediately remembered the beautiful Yuria, and her words gave him strength. Although they hardly ever saw each other for a very long time after that meeting, his feelings were vague and unformed. Every time he saw the girl, he wanted to go up to her and say a few words. Namely, he would like to look the girl straight in the eyes and say that she was his first love, and it was she who inspired him. Some time passed since then. Yuria, waking up in her palace, immediately went to her mother's bedroom and said that she needed to rest. It had already been half a day outside. Her mother hadn't even gotten out of bed and said she was fine. It was just a cold, so she thought she shouldn't worry so much. But Yuria insisted on her own and said that it was still better for her to rest once again and not strain herself, since everything could get worse at any moment. Her mother had overexerted herself greatly by attending social gatherings for her sake and had thus fallen ill. But as soon as she told her the good news, the woman immediately felt better. Mom tried to calm her down and told her that she shouldn't have worried so much. The doctor said that she was just tired and needed some rest, and then she would get better right away. And besides, she took Yuri by the hands and said that she was incredibly proud that she had opened her own business together with the crown prince. For her, it was truly incredible. The thought alone gave her a lot of strength. For her, this estate and her father were the whole world. But for Yuria, of course, she wanted more. That's why she really wanted her daughter not to be shy, but to spread her wings. Yuria was about to say something when suddenly her mother smiled and said that she didn't have to worry. Of course, the woman wouldn't tell anyone about it. The girl immediately thanked her for the support the woman had given her and said that she was definitely going to try her best to do what she had planned. However, at that moment, the door to the room suddenly opened and Lilica walked in. She immediately turned to her mother and asked how she felt. Yuria was immediately skeptical about this and looked at her sister very warily, waiting to see what she wanted. Lilica came closer and said that she heard that she was unwell and decided to check on her to find out what was wrong with her. She had a small bouquet of flowers in her hands and, smiling, she said that she really hoped that she would feel better very soon. However, when Yuria took a closer look at these flowers, she immediately understood what exactly the girl had in mind. She immediately stood up and, taking them from her, asked if the girl even knew what kind of flowers they were. In fact, they were white lilies, and they were given to honor the dead. As soon as Yuri saw these flowers, she immediately remembered one important moment. The girl remembered that in her past life, Lilica had also given them to her mother when she was unwell, so she immediately scolded her for this. Yuria slapped her on the cheek and asked, "Did she really want mother to die quickly? How could she give her a white lily?" Lilica immediately grabbed her cheek, asking for forgiveness, said that she did not know about these flowers, and also added that she was immediately ready to get rid of them. But at that moment, Jackson also entered the room and was shocked. He, of course, began to blame Yuria for everything. And the girl, who simply accidentally lost control of herself, began to blame Lilica and even hit her. Of course, Jackson, when he saw all this, immediately blamed her. Of course, she was going to deny everything, but it was too late. Lilica threw the bouquet into the fireplace, getting rid of the evidence because the girl said that Yuria had gone crazy and just decided to accuse her for no reason and even beat her. Jackson, of course, believed his half-sister, and for this reason, Yuri's reputation became even worse. Well, of course, the girl wasn't going to fall for this trick this time. She knew perfectly well what was going to happen, so she reacted to it quite calmly and with restraint. She asked her half-sister if she even knew what the white lilies meant. Lilica immediately replied that she didn't understand what was wrong with them, and Yuria replied that, of course, she didn't know the meaning of the flowers, and also asked who exactly gave them to her. The girl immediately asked, "Was it really one of her maids?" The girls who were standing behind immediately said that this was not true at all. The lady herself bought this bouquet and brought it. Lilica didn't even know what to do, since all the maids had turned away from her after that incident with the lead pan, and so she was now alone for herself. The girl's hands were shaking. She immediately reached for the bouquet and asked her sister for forgiveness, saying that she was ready to get rid of the flowers immediately, since it really was her mistake. However, Yuria snatched the bouquet from her hands and asked how she was even going to do that. She said that it was impossible to just leave it like that, because Lilica herself did not know such simple things, and this could have a very bad effect on the family's reputation, so they had to take special measures. She also thought that she should have told her father or brother about this incident, and at that very moment Jackson came into the room and, turning to Yuria, asked what was happening there. Of course, he looked very angry and wary. He was ready to blame the girl for everything, but still decided to first ask what actually happened. Well, Yuri wasn't scared when she saw him. She immediately smiled and said that he had come just in time and asked him to look at the bouquet that Lilica had brought to their mother. As soon as the man saw these white lilies, he was very shocked. He immediately looked at his half-sister with great distrust. Lilica, with a trembling voice, replied that she swore she didn't know their meaning. She just thought that their mother might like them, so she brought them to her. Jackson immediately hugged her and said that of course she couldn't have done something like that on purpose. So he tried to calm her down by saying that no one was going to blame her for it. But Yuria still said that she believed that at least Lilica's maid should have been held accountable for this. Jackson, upon hearing this, was immediately very surprised and asked what the maid had to do with it, and asked what the girl meant. But Yuria said that since Lilica did not know the meaning of white lilies, this could only have happened because of the governess, who was not paying close attention to everything. Jackson thought about it seriously and soon said that she was indeed right. After all, Lilica would not have done that on purpose, and the maid who was nearby did not watch this moment. But then suddenly Lilica, in a trembling voice, said that she really liked her governess, but her brother put his hand on her shoulder and said that it was for her own good. Yuria agreed with him and said that it would be very bad if people found out about her mistake. They would immediately start judging her origin and would spread the most terrible rumors. But smiling, she told the girl not to worry, because she could rely entirely on her sister. She was going to make sure that no one at all knew about what had happened. And when some time had passed since then, Yuria met with one of the governesses in person. The girl, having heard this story, was sincerely surprised. She immediately asked Mrs. Yuri, "Is this really the case?" The girl replied that unfortunately this really happened, and she wanted to ask her, did Lilicu really not teach the girl the meaning of flowers? Her maid replied that she was one of the best governesses, and of course she could not forget the basics of etiquette, so she certainly gave lessons to her. Yuria said that she heard her and also added that the Duke was furious when he found out, and he insisted that they had to replace her as this should never happen again. So she handed a small envelope to the maid, asking her to take it as compensation. The maid, seeing this, was sincerely amazed. She immediately asked what it was, and Yuria, with a smile on her face, answered that it was a letter of recommendation, just in case. She explained that it was with him that the girl could very quickly find another and highly paid job. As soon as the maid saw him, she was amazed and immediately thanked the lady, saying that she was very kind. But Yuria waved her hand and said that it was nothing. She understood perfectly well that her dismissal seemed unfair, and she really hoped that it would lift her spirits. Then the maid, sighing heavily, said that in fact she had not understood the girl at all before and believed all the terrible rumors that circulated around her. But Yuria smiled and said that she shouldn't have worried about that at all. Rumors had a terrible power. Once someone started babbling, the gossip would never stop. The maid smiled and said that all this was indeed so. Rumors had the greatest power, and sometimes it was almost impossible to stop them. After this, the girl left, and as she left, the lady wished her all the best and told Madame Tiller to take care of herself. Of course, she was very interested in what the governess herself would turn this story into, because she knew a lot of important people. Therefore, Yuria was in true anticipation of the future scandal. Everyone said that Lilica was as beautiful as a spring flower, and they sincerely admired her. She was the treasure of the Duke and his heir. But when Yuria did this to her, the girl was, of course, furious, and for a very long time she could not simply accept this situation. Lilica even dropped her comb once and was going to take revenge on Yuria, because of her, she couldn't do anything. She didn't understand why everything had gone wrong at some point. Everything was so perfect for her, she followed her plan and didn't worry about anything. Lilica understood perfectly well that if things continued like this, everything she had created would simply turn to dust. And she had done so much to get to that place. So she didn't want all her work to just disappear because of some Yuria. In fact, she thought that once she got to the estate, everything would go like clockwork. But in reality, everything turned out to be completely different. At first, only Yuria was invited to social events, and the girl could not shake off the label of an illegitimate child. When only Yuri was invited to the event, the girl said with a smile on her face that Despite the fact that it was very offensive for Lilica, it was quite logical that an illegitimate daughter should attend such events. Of course, when my father heard this, he was furious. He immediately shouted at her and asked how she could say such things, because in such a situation, she should have consoled her sister and not made things worse. It was at that moment when Yuria showed weakness that Lilica came up with her perfect and incredibly effective plan to make them all love her. She very often began to present her half-sister in a bad light, and to her great happiness, it was very easy to provoke stupid Yuri to anger. People around noticed this, and of course began to sympathize with Lilith and accept her into their company so that she would not feel so isolated. Even some of the maids didn't understand why Yuria was always so rude to her sister, and they all took her side. Lilica was able to win the favor of the servants rather quickly, and then everyone else. Madame Tiller was her main governess, and it was she who played a big role in spreading the story of how good and beautiful Lilica was. So over time, she became the charming but unhappy daughter of Duke Primrose. And in such stories, Yuria was the villain who tormented her poor and unhappy sister. But everything went wrong when Lilica had her birthday. First, there was the pink dress she never told anyone about, then the lead saucepan. The girl secretly gave it to the maid, and even these white lilies. Everything should have worked thanks to Yuria's hot temper, but in the end it didn't happen. Somehow her sister magically figured everything out, and this really irritated Lilica because she turned her plans against her. Yuria even had the audacity to understand and smile, and the servants who had previously always taken her side, her father and brother, they all began to consider her an annoying nuisance. And even her dear Madame Tiller, her guide into high society, distanced herself from her after all that had happened. But what infuriated Lilica the most was that Yuri was invited to the imperial palace. She tried tirelessly to get there with all her might, but she couldn't, and the girl got it all on a platter without even trying. Of course, Yuria was shocked. She was going to never forgive her sister again and really wanted her to just up and somehow disappear from her life. But when Lilica realized that her anger had completely taken over her, she realized that she needed to calm down and control herself. She believed that on that day, Yuria should definitely get angry and show everyone who she really is. She was going to make sure that no matter what happened, Yuria would never get away with it. She just had to do everything as usual and not deviate from her plan. She believed that everything that belonged to Yuria should be hers, every last one. She wanted to take it away from her sister. But Lilica's determination actually didn't last very long when rumors began to spread at a prestigious event. And the rumors were that Lady Lilica, out of stupidity, brought a lead pan from the market to the estate and also a bouquet of white lilies for a sick man. People thought this was absolutely horrific, not understanding how Madame Tiller's student could have made such a mistake. But the rumors also turned out to be bad not only for Lilica, but also for Madame Tiller, because they believed that despite her reputation, the girl was empty. And many of the aristocrats who had studied with her were now very upset, as they considered this a great humiliation. They were also outraged by the fact that they had paid a lot of money, and now her education was worth nothing. The other girls did not understand why the governess was to blame for Lilica's mistake. They accepted her into the company, even though she was the illegitimate daughter of a duke, and the girl ended up repaying them in such a terrible way. They believed that it was all because she was a commoner, and they were all stupid, ungrateful, and responded to good with evil. Lilica, who was nearby at that moment and heard these words, immediately approached her, and she, screaming loudly, said that no matter what she did there, the girls would do better to watch themselves. The ladies immediately looked at her, not understanding what she had said at all, and Lilica, with a very displeased expression on her face, asked her to repeat, this time directly to her eyes, what she had said. The girl couldn't answer this, so Lilica said that Lady Dravel should have understood that her family owed a lot to Duke Primrose, and their family was nothing compared to hers. So she advised the girl to just keep her mouth shut if she didn't want a bad fate for herself. The ladies were amazed. They immediately asked Lilica what she was saying because they didn't think she was capable of such a thing. But at that moment, Yuria stepped forward and, asking for forgiveness, said that she would like to intervene a little in their conversation. She explained to the girls that she wanted to apologize for her sister because she had been going through very difficult times lately, and she simply could not control the emotions that were coming up in her. Yuria also said that she was ready to apologize for her, but she would ask them not to say anything like that about her sister again, even behind her back. The girls immediately apologized, saying that they really shouldn't have done such a thing and that it would never happen again. Lilica was incredibly angry at that moment because she was going to set up her sister and not make her save her. And the people around, who were not aware of all these conversations, were very surprised. They immediately began to talk among themselves because for the first time in their lives they saw Lilica in such a state. But the girl just turned around and started to walk away without even saying a single word. Because she didn't want all this attention towards herself, she was even very surprised that this was actually happening in reality. Of course, she didn't think that Yuria was now going to humiliate her in front of the other ladies. She certainly wasn't going to leave this issue like that and wanted to fight for her rights. After she left, the girls immediately began talking among themselves, and one of them asked Lady Druovich if everything was all right with her. The girl immediately said that she was fine. She just didn't expect such behavior from Yuria because she never defended her sister. Indeed, the girls agreed with her and even began to change their opinions about her a little. They even suggested that, most likely, those terrible rumors were simply the result of some misunderstanding, because judging by Lilica's behavior that day, one cannot rush and judge people by first impressions. At that moment, Yuria went outside and saw that Lilica had already started to get into the carriage. She immediately approached her and asked, "Have you really decided to leave already?" Yuria, smiling happily, said that the girl was not herself that day and even ran away from the event, and usually this never happened. She still wanted to say something, when suddenly Lilica shouted at her and said that she was actually not herself. The girl looked at her angrily and said that she didn't know why she had suddenly changed so much. However, she wasn't going to let the girl manipulate her anymore. But Yuria was very pleased with this result because Lilica finally showed her true face. The girl was about to say that she was even interested in what Lilica was going to do to her, when suddenly the coachman blocked her way and told Yuria that the carriage was ready to leave, so it would be better for her to just step aside. He looked kind of angry, so Yuria was surprised, and Lilica got into the carriage and said that she decided to return home because she didn't want to stay there any longer. She smiled and told her sister to just enjoy the banquet and not worry about anything. The coachman approached her and immediately asked if she was okay. The girl said that everything was fine, so she simply asked that they go home already. Yuria stood outside for a while and was shocked. She thought that Lilica was alone and that no one else supported her. However, the girl was wrong since this night was clearly very hostile towards Yuria, and she assumed that, most likely, the rumors had not yet reached them. According to the story, Lilica was about to become a color, and when that happened, Yuria knew how she would start to behave. Therefore, the girl knew that she had to separate Lilica and this prince by every possible means. After the banquet where her sister made a scene right in front of the other ladies, Yuria still couldn't forget about her knight's behavior, even after some time had passed. All the knights who were in the Duke's service lived in a separate building not far from the main one, so most likely they should have learned about what was happening to Lilica a little later than everyone else. By the time the rumors reached them, there would be very little information left. They would, of course, have their own opinion on the matter and believed that Lilica would never do such a thing, so they thought that someone would simply set her up. They thought that it would probably be Yuria's doing again, since she had always disliked her. So they were going to protect Lilica and help her, since they thought that everyone was only on her sister's side. Therefore, in the eyes of the knights, Yuria became a real villain, and Lilica's strength also lay in the fact that many people supported her. So Yuria knew that at any cost she had to leave this girl alone, and then she would lose her abilities. After the girl was in her office, she was already returning to the room and heard some scream in the corridor. It was Lilica. She shouted loudly at the maid and said that she had said that she was not hungry, but the maid replied that she had not eaten anything since the previous night. The mistress just dumped her out the door and slammed it behind her, and the maid was very worried. She was just very worried about her, and so she wanted to do the best. But in the end, everything turned out differently than she expected. Lilica continued to yell at her even through the closed door and told her to leave, because the girl would like to be alone with her thoughts so that no one would bother her. This maid's name was Jira, and Lilica asked if her lover had recently dumped her, and she said that it was only because the girl had no common sense. In fact, Jira was one of the younger maids, and she always adored Lilica with all her heart. And the fact that the girl treated her like that, she did it only because she no longer had any respect for the maid because of her status, or because she had not been able to control her emotions lately, so she went and lost her temper. Meanwhile, Yuria approached her and immediately asked Jira if everything was okay, because the girl was shaking all over with horror and even burst into tears. Seeing her tears, the girl tried to explain to the maid that Lilica was just upset, but still, she really shouldn't have said such terrible words about her. The maid, wiping away tears, replied that she could not believe that Lilica had treated her that way. She had simply been worried about her and wanted to do the best for her, but in the end she realized that it would have been better if she had done nothing at all. Yuria hugged the girl and with a smile on her face, in a gentle voice, said that the girl simply could not cope with her emotions, so she did not need to take all this to heart and despair so much. Of course, Yuria couldn't foresee this, but she thought that it was very good, because Jira was sociable and had many friends, so she would be a very useful accomplice. The maid looked at her with tear-stained eyes and said that, in fact, Lilica had been behaving too much lately. She was about to say something else, but the lady stopped her, saying that such words could quickly turn into rumors, and asked that Jira do her a favor instead. She would need to leave for a while. The maid immediately understood everything, so she told her mistress that she would do everything, and Yuria was going to take away from Lilica the little support she had left. Some time had passed since then, and Yuria had to go to meet the prince. Mom, seeing her off to the carriage, immediately asked if she was sure that this was the right outfit. And the girl replied that she simply had no choice. She had to remain unnoticed, so she simply had to dress appropriately. But her mother still didn't understand it. She said it was too subtle. And Yuria, who was wearing a rather modest dress and even with a cape on top, said that she simply had no other choice. So she asked not to discuss this topic anymore. In fact, she was supposed to meet with the crown prince that day to decide where exactly their boutique should be located. They both agreed that it would be best to inspect everything in person, but it would be very easy to recognize both of them, and Yuri certainly didn't want that. So they decided to hide their identity as much as possible. When Yuria got into the carriage with her mother, she said that His Highness was also supposed to be dressed in a similar way, so she didn't have to worry. Mother, hearing this, was still surprised, but said that in that case she could be calm since she was really very worried that something would go wrong. Some time passed since then, and Yuria arrived first to the city. She walked around and even began to get a little nervous. At first, the girl was very worried that such an outfit could attract even more attention than her usual dresses. However, when she arrived at the meeting place itself, she realized that there were so many people around that no one even paid attention to her, so she thought that everything could have been fine. However, she doubted how she would be able to find the crown prince in such a crowd, so she simply stood for a while at the place where they had agreed to meet. And after a few minutes, a rather tall man approached her, and as soon as Yuria looked at him, she immediately recognized that it was Enoch. The boy smiled and apologized for being late. He said he didn't do it on purpose. In fact, he was also dressed in very simple clothes, considering he was the crown prince and never wore such clothes. Therefore, when the girl saw him, she was very surprised not only by his appearance, but also by how quietly he crept up on her. The man holding out his hand asked if she was ready to start, and Yuria immediately replied that the sooner the better. As they walked forward, they talked about how it was very good that no one recognized them. And of course, this was really true. Yuria thought that they, of course, would not be recognized, but they were still stared at, especially at the prince, who walked around smiling all the time. She didn't understand what the point was in even trying to hide her identity if he still stood out so incredibly much. People around turned around when they saw him and even thought that he was some kind of knight or perhaps an actor, so they could not take their eyes off the man. Yuria suggested that most likely this should not have been done. If someone had noticed them, the journalist would have published a scandalous article. And that would mean, in turn, that the girl could say goodbye to her business. They walked in silence for a while, and then Enoch suddenly came closer to her and addressed her. He asked with a smile on his face why the girl was so serious and even somewhat sad. He really didn't understand. Yuri, hearing this, was surprised and immediately asked, where did he get this idea from? And the guy asked if she was really nervous because he looked good. Hearing this, the girl became wary. She immediately asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. But he, laughing so quickly, said that he was just joking and nothing more. They walked in silence for a while, and then the girl asked if she really looked worried. The guy said a little. He was sure she would feel much better immediately once they started looking at the buildings for the boutique. Or maybe he could tell her another joke. He asked if it could help her and lift her spirits. Yuria immediately said that it shouldn't be done, and she smiled slightly. She thought he was a little strange, but still she felt very comfortable and at ease around him. Many hours had passed since then, and they had already finished inspecting several buildings. And he, sighing heavily, said that for some reason, not a single building suited her. But Yuria said that the first one had a big tree in front of the entrance, and the second one had a bad layout, so they were definitely not suitable. Then the man tried to calm her down and said that they hadn't seen everything yet, so they definitely shouldn't stay. The guy and the girl sat down on a bench to rest a bit, and then suddenly Yuri asked if he had already come up with a name for the boutique. Enoch immediately replied that he had come up with the name, namely Uneta. In the ancient language, it meant morning. He also said that the girl might have thought that it was too grandiose a name for a cosmetic boutique, but she believed that good cosmetics at an affordable price for most people could change a person's life as much as the opportunity to meet another morning. For example, it could even help those who, like Her Highness the Princess, had mental wounds due to the condition of her skin. Of course, making money is also important, but he wanted to focus on that, and Yuria fully supported him since she shared his thoughts. When she said a few more of her ideas, the man smiled. He admired this girl and was very glad that he was able to find a common wave with her. After thinking for a while, he told the girl that, after listening to her, he realized that it was indeed an appropriate name and was very glad that she approved of it. Yuria also said that she had been thinking for some time about what new product to release and asked if he had any ideas by chance. She asked if there was anything he thought every person should have to be useful to them. Enoch thought seriously, and he had never really thought about what cosmetics every person might need. The guy said that Vivian's problems had already been solved, so he didn't think he could need anything else. Yuria said that she understood everything, and then she saw that his face suddenly turned red and asked if he was really hot. The man said that was exactly it. The hood made him uncomfortable because it was almost summer. He would soon have to join the knights for training in the mountains, and being in the sun for too long would cause skin problems. So he said it would be incredibly great if this summer was not as hot as last one, because it really brought incredible discomfort. And at that moment, Yuria began to think seriously. She saw how their knights trained under the bright, scorching sun. And because of being exposed to the sun for a long time, their skin became red and burnt. There was no cosmetics in that world that could save them from this. So, smiling, she said that she had some ideas for a new product. She looked at him with a gentle gaze, and with a smile on her face asked what he thought about a cream that could protect the skin from the scorching rays of the sun. She decided that this way she could solve two problems at once and considered it a really incredibly good option. Finally, after a very long search, they were able to find a building that they liked. Not only was it located in the very center of the city, in a crowded area, but it was also two-story. Yuria was delighted since the first floor could be set up as a store, and the upper floor as an office in which to work in peace. The interior also turned out to be quite suitable for selling cosmetics, so they wouldn't have to spend a lot on renovations. However, the most important plus was the fact that, as if wanting to support them, the setting sun illuminated their future boutique, and they simply fell in love with it with all their hearts. When the contract was signed, Yuria thanked the man and said that his help was very valuable to her. Enoch smiled and replied that she had done a lot of work too, and he was very glad that they had found the building in such a good area, even on the first day of searching. Yuria said that she agreed with him and was already looking forward to everything that the future had in store for her. They walked until late in the evening and got to talking. Yuria asked His Highness how he learned how to properly run a business. The man was happy to talk to her and said that it was part of the training for the Crown Prince. He was interested in trade, so he listened carefully to the teacher and tried to remember everything. The girl said that she was sincerely impressed, but Enoch replied that it was rather she who was impressed, because she had an incredibly developed intuition, and asked the guy if she had definitely never run any businesses before. The girl was even a little embarrassed. She did not understand why he suddenly decided to give her so many compliments. She could cope with criticism, but she was defenseless against compliments. In a voice trembling with uncertainty, she said that she was very glad that he thought so highly of her. Then the prince said that it was already quite late and asked if he could walk her home. But Yuria refused. She said that she could have gotten there herself because the street was well lit, but the man continued to insist on his own and said that she was completely alone and not even the knight accompanied her. The girl replied that she might not be accompanied by a knight, but she was not defenseless. She had a magical artifact for protection. At that moment, she showed him exactly that. The man asked in surprise, didn't the artifacts have a limited number of activations? And for that reason, they were a little unreliable. The girl said that was exactly it, but Enoch replied that in that case, it would be best for her to leave it for some other, more important occasion. In fact, if she had taken one of Duke Jackson's knights or Lyrica with her, they might have found out where she was. And if her father had found out about it, he would certainly have been happy at first that she was getting closer to the emperor's family. But eventually he would have found out that she wanted to run a business and would have simply forbidden her to do so. For this reason, Yuria could only take the artifact, but His Highness was right. It would be best not to use it just like that, but to save it for some other occasion. So, having hidden it back, she nevertheless agreed to let him take her, and he replied that it was a great honor for him that she did not refuse. Quite a lot of time has passed since then, and Yuria finally returned home. There she was immediately met by her mother. Bowing, she apologized for being late and said that she must have been very worried about it. But Mom replied that she didn't have to worry about it, since she was visiting a friend anyway, and also said that it was already too late and asked if Yuria had gone herself. The girl, turning back and looking at the departing prince, said that it was he who accompanied her, because he was also worried that it was too late. The woman, hearing this, immediately smiled and said that he was quite a good person, and Yuria did not deny it and said that it was indeed so. After that, they got into the carriage to finally go home and began to talk about what had happened. Mom immediately asked how their discussion of the business went, and also whether they had found a suitable building that they were looking for. Yuria replied that they were very lucky that they were able to complete the job in just one day and found the perfect building, one that suited both of them. Her mother smiled when she heard this and said that they were great and had tried very hard, so she also added that she was proud of her daughter. Well, Yuria, smiling, also said that, in addition, during her conversation with His Highness, she came up with another new product that she would like to manufacture. And she said she was going to start working on it as soon as they got home, but Mom wasn't too happy about that idea. She said the girl had been working all day anyway and wondered if it wouldn't be better for her to take a little rest first. But Yuria replied that she shouldn't worry because she really enjoyed this kind of work, so everything was fine. The girl herself thought about the fact that for the first time in her life, she was doing what she really wanted, and could even discuss it with her dear mother. So she decided that on this most beautiful cloudless night, she had no reason to be sad. Meanwhile, Enoch had already returned home and immediately went to his sister to greet her. As soon as he entered, Vivian immediately asked how the meeting went,